Welcome back to another episode of Cardano and Coffee, where we create real-life conversations with the leaders, pioneers, inventors, and members of the Cardano community. I'm Mustafa, the founder of DYR Crypto and the host of the show. And boy, have I got a special guest for you guys today. Alexander Watanabe is in the house, everybody. He is the artist behind the NFT project Unsigned Algorithms, the first algorithmically generated Cardano-based NFT project. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Alexander.
I appreciate it. I know we had a little bit of scheduling difficulties on my side, so I'm so grateful to be here, Mustafa. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yep, and if you guys aren't familiar with Unsigned Algorithms, it's one of the most successful NFT projects on the Cardano ecosystem right now. I just looked at it today on cNFT, and it's very in demand. Let's just say, very in demand.
It's been really crazy. I think it's a little bit different than the normal kind of 10K drop. There were 31,119 pieces, and which was a lot. People kind of doubted whether or not you could sell out that many NFTs, right? It was kind of uncharted territory. But I think it's just been a crazy story after story. It started at like 16 ADA, then 25, then 50 ADA per Unsig, as we call them now. They were actually bundled into purchases of 50 ADA all the time, but you got 3 or 2 or 1 in the different phases. And now I think they go for something like 900 to 1,000 ADA each. It's just like the project is not about money, but I do kind of use the financial metrics of the project as like a yardstick for interest and people's time. And it's just, I can't believe it, everything that's happened. And we're about 2 or 3 months out from the drop now, and I'm kind of like decompressing and understanding everything that happened now. So I'd love to have a kind of in-depth conversation with you on what's going on in the space and everything else. So thank you so much, Mustafa.
Thank you. We're actually going to cover some new ground today.
Awesome.
There's a bunch of interviews out there of you on different channels, but I made it a point to ask you questions that you've never answered on YouTube before.
That's what I'm looking forward to, man. I feel like this is like, maybe if the other ones were all 101, this is like the 102 lecture, right? Like the next episode, we can say. So I'm excited to hear that.
Yep. But before we get started, to all the guests who are watching, if you like Cardano content and you want your bags to pump, then you need to subscribe to this channel, like this video, because every time somebody subscribes and likes this video, YouTube recommends it to other people. And the more awareness we have about Cardano and the Cardano ecosystem, the more interest we have in it, the more people are investing in it, the more benefit everybody gets from that. So be sure to subscribe and like this video. Not financial advice. Now let's get back to Alexander. Again, I want to thank you for coming on. And could you just give us some context, and can you tell us about the story of your professional career so far?
Sure. I have a kind of weird one. I grew up in the States, New York, and then moved to Utah because I had a single parent who went crazy. I decided to come. I ran away from Utah to come to Japan, where my other parent is from, and I went to undergrad here. And I basically studied this very weird program that was just like liberal arts, no major, right? And I just like read literature and blah 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 blah. And during that time, I discovered photography, and I was taking a bunch of photos. And someone, I think my mom might have said, like, why do you take photos of buildings? Why don't you try designing them? And I thought, oh, that's a pretty interesting idea, right? And this was back in like 2000s or so. So digital photography was a thing, but I had decided to learn film photography, and I spent a bunch of time developing black and white chemistry, like in a dark room that I set up in my bathroom, breathing in a bunch of bad chemicals and stuff like that. So I took photography pretty seriously, and that developed a kind of eye in composition. And then I was lucky enough to apply for a scholarship and got into University of Michigan, which had one of the top architecture programs at the time. I think still does, where they had a pretty different approach to architecture in terms of they're really taken with like what they call digital fabrication, using 6-axis robots and CNC machines and all this other kinds of equipment to fabricate and produce these kind of components for architecture. And so I got a lot of exposure to like digital processes, even though I'm a building architect, not an IT architect, right? And during the course of that, I got exposure to these little things called Arduinos, which are like usually these kind of open source hardware thing that you use to teach your kids programming. And I from there I did a master of science in material systems, which was like how to build smart buildings kind of thing, like giving eyes and ears and muscles to buildings so that they weren't just passive things but could react to you. And that's where my whole like programming journey began. I worked in R&D for 3 or 5 years in the States with a bunch of smart people, much smarter than myself, with PhDs, and like embedding IoT sensors into glass laminate assemblies for, I don't know if you know the Burj Khalifa, tallest building in the world, stuff like that. We made the glass for that kind of building, and a lot of like high tech windshield assemblies, stuff like that, for these what do you call it, like autonomous vehicles, different things. And from there, I got the chance to move to India for 3 years, where I was doing like again, like smart home IoT development. I got more into manufacturing, more into programming, and eventually I finally got a job in Japan because of air quality issues in India. I really loved living there. I met my wife there, and we have a bunch of kids together now. But I for the past 3 years, I've been working as an AI ML developer. Where I finally kind of really took programming seriously, and I was training and gathering data sets, cleaning them, training models on like predictive forecasting, basically like how to, you know, predict maybe like sales trends on the supply chain where we would need to put stuff. But I always kind of remember this architecture training in the back of my head, right, about like design and all this kind of stuff. And I always wanted to do something with it because I felt it was kind of like, why did I go to grad school twice for all this stuff? And I kind of went like, because I had the technical ability and because the market, paid me much better to do this technical stuff. I kind of didn't really, I don't know, harvest the fruit of all that training. And so when NFTs kind of came along and I saw all this stuff, I'm like, wait a second, I can do that. Right. And I actually think there's some additional kind of perspective that I have that is maybe not being met right now that could add something to the space. So I did that and it's changed my life. I quit that AI job, where I was making decent money, above six figures, but it just couldn't compare with what I was able to do with a handful of people on Cardano. And now I'm basically set up and I'm able to do whatever I want to do. And this is my dream now. I wanted to become a full-time Haskell developer and just work on Cardano. And that's possible because of these funny little things called NFTs.
Wow.
Sorry, these answers are going to get shorter. We'll have more of a back and forth, but it's just,
I really appreciate you
yeah.
going into depth on that because that's the first time I heard about that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't know
Trying
you
to
were
give you
from,
something extra.
yeah, didn't know you were from New York. Didn't know you lived in Utah. So you went from New York to Utah, then to
Crazy
Japan.
stories. Crazy stories.
I'm sure we could make this into like a 10-hour interview
Yeah,
if we wanted to with all your stories.
it's your call.
Um, but
Keep it moving. Well, we'll pick up the
I'm
pace.
gonna keep it moving here.
Awesome.
But we'll come back to that.
Mhm.
But my first question is about my next question is about Cardano.
Okay.
So how do you feel about the way your project's been received by the Cardano community and the cNFT community? And how do you think it would have been received differently had it been launched on a different chain like Ethereum, Solana, or something like that?
It wouldn't have worked on another chain, and not technically, but I think that I myself am very interested. Even before I was in Cardano before I was in NFTs, and I came to NFTs actually through Cardano and through SpaceBuds. But Cardano has a very unique community of people who are more, I'll say, like rigorous or academically minded, right? And kind of like I think they got their thinking caps on, if you can say something like that. And what I like to say is, like within the Cardano community, I was taught like Charles and Co did me a huge favor by assembling this audience of like deep thinkers and interested people.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is not like Shiba Coin or whatever, right? Like in Moon Boy land. So if I had tried talking about like some of the, I think the deeper concepts, which are ultimately what allowed Unsigs to be successful, to those kind of people, they would have just like, where's the memes, bro? You know, like where's the cum rocket or whatever the nonsense they're talking about, right? So because there was already this group of people, you know, it's not everyone on the Cardano chain that likes Unsigs, but there was a higher concentration of the kinds of people I wanted to talk to.
Hmm.
And so um I know the project wouldn't have worked not if it wasn't on Cardano. And as for reception, I mean, um it's changed my life. It's, I think it's in terms of total volume sold on the secondary, it's still in like the top, you know, handful of projects. If I pull it up right now, 2.3 million ADA has been traded on the secondary market for Unsigs.
Wow.
I think the last time I looked at the market cap, which is a really weird way to talk about an art project, the project had a market that had the second largest market cap, something like 30 million ADA or something like that, which
Wow.
is kind of a crazy thing, right? To think that an art project
Yeah.
I worked on paper has a value of around, you know, like 50 to 60 million dollars. It's like that's it's an amazing kind of thing.
Groundbreaking.
Yeah.
There's artists who have been artists for many years and couldn't ever
Yeah.
say, you know, that, but you come into the game and right away, like, but this isn't your, is this your first NFT project?
This is my first NFT project. I was working on Cardano before. I have a stake pool, Monad.
Hmm.
I was working on a visualization of where all the ADA, like not, we've probably seen a few of these maps of Cardano where they show, you know, where all the stake pools are and that kind of thing with a little dot on the city. What I was doing was a little bit different. It was like a kind of topographical map, which showed, you know, like bar chart kind of heights plotted into onto a map showing like how much ADA was in each region,
Hmm.
which I thought was a pretty cool thing, right?
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing something like that.
Yeah, I can. If we want later, I can pull it up right now, so it's ready to go.
Yeah.
But it was basically, you know, you could see that Europe, South America, you know, EMEA, all these kind of different places, what was going on there. I haven't updated it since Epic 270. I used to update it every Epic. I was
Hmm.
thinking about doing, you know, dusting it off for Epic 300 and having a nice little snapshot.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it was, that was the first thing that I worked on, and then NFTs happened, and I was just looking at it like, what is going on here? I don't get it. Right? Like,
It was like
but
yesterday that NFTs came out on a Cardano. Like I
mhm.
bought Cbits when they came out, and it was like the weirdest launch ever. And
Google
it's
Docs or something I heard about.
yeah, exactly. And like you gotta, you know, the way you would send it to them, and they would send you something back, and it was just like
Mhm.
I was like, this is sketchy, but okay, you know.
Yeah,
So it, but
willing to throw the dice with how much was it, 25 ADA, 50 ADA or something like that.
yeah, something like that. I bought like a couple of them, and
Mhm.
you know, got a couple interesting ones, and but since then I put NFTs on the shelf.
Mhm.
But then I started to get back into it recently. But let's go back to Cardano for a second.
Mhm.
Cardano blockchain as an ecosystem. Can you describe how you discovered it? And you know, just tell us how you discovered blockchain in general and crypto. Like, what was your first exposure to that?
So I back in architecture school, I was building computers for all my friends, right? um because architects do renders, like 3D renders of their stuff, and you need like a beastly computer to do it. So I built like 10 or so machines. This was back in 2012 or so. um and I remember reading about like the pizza, right, the 50,000 Bitcoin pizza, like as it happened. And the I always joked, you know, the reason I was poor was Nvidia has this thing called CUDA, which is like a very handy library for running a bunch of stuff on your GPU,
Mhm.
before OpenCL and some other things were a thing. And so I used NVIDIA GPUs, and NVIDIA GPUs, you could only mine like hundreds of Bitcoin on. And on an AMD GPU, you could mine thousands. And so it was like, well, there's no point in mining Bitcoin if I could only mine hundreds of them instead of thousands of them, right? Like, and so even though I had like 10 beastly computers that could have mined, you know, hundreds of Bitcoin each, I didn't do it at the time. And that was so stupid. But the first time I got into crypto was when Bitcoin was going through $100. And I decided, okay, it's time to take this seriously. I think it was like in 2013.
Yeah.
And so I bought $5,000 worth of computers. I built, you know, I think I had like 12 or so AMD GPUs that I finally bought. R9 290s. I put them in my graduate family student housing, which had free electricity. I ran heavy gauge extension cords from my basement. I was in this like 3-story townhouse weird thing. I was running all of it to one room in Michigan, and I kept the window open in November with a box fan blowing in. And I could walk in that room in the morning. It was freezing outside, right? Michigan winters, and in my underwear, and just stand because like the heat of like 5,000 watts of computers running was enough to keep me warm. And I lost interest in Bitcoin around that time because FPGAs and ASICs were coming online. And I saw the writing on the wall that was like, oh, these are all going to centralize to China. And so, and I got my first real job at the time. That was that glass thing, with the Burj Khalifa and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried day trading for a while and mining, and I was like, I can't do this at the same time. So I made the very poor financial decision to get serious about my real job and pursue a career in R&D and all this other stuff. And so I forgot about crypto and Bitcoin. I sold everything. I think I had at the peak like something like 25 Bitcoin or something like that.
Man.
Sold it for, tens of grand. And I forgot about it until I was in India, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when I was trying to learn Haskell. And I was on the Haskell subreddit, and I kept seeing this Cardano thing pop up occasionally. I'm like, what is this? And I got really interested because I'm a big fan of functional programming. And if like there's no state, you basically just like chain inputs to outputs and compose functions together. A blockchain is basically a very functional design thing where like you don't change the past, you only move forward. And I always thought it made sense to, I wanted to be a part of, at the time I had illusions of grandeur, to make a blockchain in a functional programming language. And I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm not that smart. And so at first I was kind of sad when I found out about Cardano. I was like, oh, someone already did it. That idea is taken. But then I started thinking like, wait a second, like these people seem actually really competent, which was very different from what I was used to dealing with in the crypto space, right?
Sure.
With like low effort copy paste projects and everything. And then when I started to read more about it, I got really excited. I was like, holy shit, these guys are doing what I wanted to do better than I could have ever done it. So that allowed me to move on to stage 2, which was, what would I do if there was a blockchain project written in a functional programming language that I could just take advantage of as like sorry, my voice is going, as like a DApp developer or as a, entrepreneur. And I think the rest is history. But yeah, that was that.
Interesting. Fascinating story, actually. The only thing is like, the one thing that intimidates me personally is coding, programming. How do you overcome the fear behind that?
So it's a good segue both into Unsigs. Like the thing that I recommend most is there's a website and a book called Automate the Boring Stuff. And I think it's just automatetheboringstuff.com. And
Okay.
it's in Python, which is a very nice, easy, friendly. It looks like English. There's not a bunch of semicolons and brackets and all this stuff. Python is a very beginner-friendly language. And what that book does is, if you have a desk job, like you work in Excel, or you have a bunch of files and folders, blah, blah, like how do you rename all the files in this folder if you have like hundreds of photos or something like that, without just right clicking rename and having it like go space parentheses 1 2 3 4 5, like the way it does in Windows, right? Like you can actually, all these real world things that you probably don't want to do, it teaches you how to do that. I don't think it really teaches you how to make an app or anything, but it gives you atomic useful lessons for how to make your life easier. And I think the most important thing, and many people say the most important thing in programming, is to actually have a project that you're working on. And to be honest, when most people hear that, they're like, well, I can't really contribute to Cardano. Like there's no project that I'm capable of contributing to. But what you just have to break that down is like, if you have a task around your house, or a thing at work that takes a lot of time to do. If you learn this, I'll give you an example. What I did in Python, we had this really bad attendance system when COVID came out, and I wrote a little Python script that automated the mouse movement so that like I could fill out my attendance at the end of the month, just by like it would automate and move them. You didn't have to do this in Python. There's other like macro things, right? But it was a little bit smarter and it had a little bit of conditional logic on it. Like if it was a holiday or if it was a whatever, it didn't whatever, and it just moved the mouse around, filled out my timesheet for me,
Wow.
and then hit enter. And I gave that to everyone in the company. Uh, a little bit of trouble with some people with the HR. Like you kind of didn't. That wasn't really the point. But the system was so cumbersome. It took you like 2 days to fill out your timesheet,
Hmm.
and I was like, that's such a bad use of company time that like all the engineers are stopping, right? And so I something like that is very useful, and it's also why I chose to do the unsigned algorithm project in Python,
Mm.
because I say, the actual programming behind Unsigs is all like Python 101 or programming 101. It's really just math and lists, basically lists of lists that allow you to do the entire Unsig thing. And some people will say, oh, it's not complex enough or whatever, right? Like, but as an architect or as a designer, we tend to like things that produce like intricacy or not complexity, but like something amazing from simple parts, right? Like the same thing with a physicist. If you have an equation that describes the phenomenon of the universe, but it requires like 30 terms or 100 terms to make sense, it's not really a beautiful thing, right? We like it when things reduce down to a simple form. And so a lot of thinking in the Unsig project was, how do I reduce this thing down into a core set of minimal parts, which produces all this kind of variety? And to close it home, I hope that one aspect of the Unsig project is that there's this thing that is interesting. Now it's been successful. And I hope that, if people are interested in learning programming, of getting over this hurdle of, what it is to code, there's a little bit of like, you know, uh, an on-ramp there that hopefully people can look at and see, yeah, this isn't so intimidating, this isn't so scary. I've put a few videos up on how to generate your unsig, and the Gimba Labs guys, who are also another great team in the Cardano community, are kind of like walking through how to generate unsigs and making some pedagogical materials. But if you know math, if you know addition, if you've worked in Excel, and you can think of like a spreadsheet of cells, like you know everything you need to know to understand unsigs, basically.
Mhm.
And that combined with the Automate the Boring Stuff book, you can find some examples in there that will help you out. And the last thing I'll say is, not everyone needs to code. I don't really buy into this like coding for everyone thing,
Mhm.
like, and running the Unsig project, I've kind of realized like I don't really enjoy managing a large group of people or anything like that, and other people do. So find some way, some skill set that you have, and contribute it to the Cardano community, right? If that's making a podcast, if
Mhm.
that's talking to people, if that's outreach. There's this lady, Amanda, who has I think she's like Korean American or something. She had that Ada Angels podcast for a while. I don't know if she's still doing it. When
Mhm.
I was coming up, it was a big thing, and she was just hanging out in Facebook groups where like I would want to scratch my eyes out, like, oh, like, make it stop. These questions are so stupid. But she was so friendly, answering beginners' questions, like, so if you really decide you can't code, decide what you can't, figure out what you can do, and figure out how to use that to help Cardano move forward. That's my advice, right?
Yeah, that was actually one of the main purposes I created this show, so I can contribute in a way, and also to
Hmm.
attract other people to contribute, because
Yeah.
I want people to see like I'm just a regular guy
Hmm.
having conversations with people, but this is a good way to contribute. And
Exactly.
so whatever it is that you're good at, find a way to implement that into the Cardano ecosystem, and everybody will do better because of that.
Especially if you think it's lacking, right? Like I looked at the NFT space and I thought like, no assault, no whatever, but like I'm not a fan of like trading cards or cartoon stuff anymore, right? And so like I thought, there's this thing happening and I have this other kind of perspective that I think I can contribute to the space. Let me give that a go, right? And so I think that's a very powerful thing, is not just to think about yourself as an island, like what am I good at only, but what am I good at and what's going on in the world right now, specifically Cardano, and how can, is there some kind of reinterpretation or a way to kind of remix this into something else that will kind of help, and I think that is a large part of the success of the project. So
Hmm.
great
Yeah.
questions, by the way. I'm loving this so far, Mustafa. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, as I mentioned, I've created this as a way to contribute to the community, because I felt like something was lacking, and I felt like there was definitely a lack of good quality, very insightful content on Cardano. There actually is a good amount of content, but I think video and audio content is definitely lacking. Twitter is probably the best place, in my opinion, right now to get information.
It,
But
it's it's really weird. I
yeah,
never used Twitter before this,
yeah,
and I was more of a
me too.
Reddit guy.
Mhm.
Like I like long form conversations and whatnot. But what I really kind of started to realize, I think Twitter is really like an intellectual social media. It's
Yeah,
also just like shit posting and whatever, but it's really hard to get Twitter, right? And it's also
yeah,
really hard to get a following on Twitter. Like,
yeah,
and there's something about figuring out what's the saying, like uh brevity is the soul of wit or
y-
something like that, right?
yeah.
Being able to concisely express an idea versus on Reddit, you can write paragraphs and paragraphs, right? And think that you're such an erudite, whatever individual, but no one's reading this or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've come to like Twitter, and I never used Twitter before Unsigs even. My other
yeah.
stake pool friend was like, "You got to make a Twitter account." I'm like, "Fuck Twitter! I don't sorry, I don't want anything to do with Twitter." But really, the whole project wouldn't have worked without Twitter, which puts me in a weird position where I'm a guy without a Facebook account, and now I'm like totally dependent on social media for my livelihood. So it's weird.
I actually the same exact position as I never used Twitter, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out.
Hmm.
But 2021, that was the year I cracked the code on Twitter, and I
Yeah.
mean I'm not big on Twitter yet, but I've been able to consistently find I cracked that code where I'm able to consistently get people to building up a following. So
Yeah.
um, so follow me on Twitter, guys, and follow
Exactly.
Alexander on Twitter.
My
uh,
my my best friend, he blocked me on Twitter on my personal account like 10 years ago because
uh,
I never logged in, and like my account got taken over by bots, and they were just spamming, like, and I didn't care. He's like, dude, your account is like just spamming, like porn tweets, and I was just like, I don't care about Twitter, leave me alone, right? And so it was just really like a weird 180 for me.
I couldn't imagine what I would do without Twitter now. There's just, I mean, I pretty much discover almost everything initially on Twitter now, and then I'm finding, the website on Google and,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
YouTube channel and everything. But Twitter is definitely like
Yeah.
that primary source you want to go to. So with Cardano, you said it was the language, the functionality of
Yep.
it. That's what brought you to it.
Hmm.
Okay. And so how does that relate to your philosophy of a life well lived?
How do you? Sorry, you have to unpack
So,
that for me a little bit.
so
Like
let me
Mhm.
yeah, I'll be more specific. So how does, are you sort of like, do you have a philosophy in life that things should be functional, that kind of thing?
For sure, for sure. I mean, there's two parts of it. I mean, as an architect, we have all these kind of famous sayings about like form over function, or no, function over form. Sorry, I got it backwards. I got it twisted. Function over form, right? This what the thing does is more important than how the thing looks,
Mm.
right? So it's really embarrassing right there. No architect friend hit me for that. But people minimalism is not an aesthetic.
Mm.
It's a philosophy, right? That to before I got into design, I hated design as a literature student because I thought design was a superfluous thing that was added on at the end of a process. Like you have a shoe, now go put a logo and some colors on it. Or you have a t-shirt, now put like a Nike logo on it, right? Like, or Quicksilver or whatever kind of, like all these kind of t-shirt design was like the extent of my understanding of design. But what design is really about is like removing things down to their essential core. It's kind of like a surgeon like extracting a tumor,
Mm.
right? Like imagine you're making a thing and it's just surrounded by tumors everywhere. The job of a designer is to sculpt or design and just like to shave away as much tumor as possible and kind of reveal what is the healthy tissue behind all that tumor, what is the essence of the thing we're trying to do. And in a lot of ways, that analogy can be flawed because there's no like healthy tissue inside it. You actually have to make the healthy tissue inside of that tumor, while at the same time, you have managers or even your audience who are telling you, I want this, I want this, I want this. But like to be able to cut through the cruft and get at like the core essential insights of what makes this thing, what will make this thing, which maybe doesn't exist in the world yet, like the best version of what it is. And you're just, it's more of an editorial process, right? Of it's also about creation, but it's about removing and stripping away things. And in my way of life, like maybe my bookshelves are gonna betray me, but like I try to have as little as possible. I try not to, accumulate useless stuff around me. I always have to fight the grandparents, giving plastic shit to the kids. Um, we don't need these toys. I'm never going to use this. It's just going to go into a landfill. So, the reason I'm kind of happy with Cardano is because of that functional paradigm that it's in, which is a little bit different than, functional reform, but it is a very kind of like axiomatic from first principles thinking about what is a blockchain, how should a blockchain work. And I think it looked at what came before it with respect and understanding and kind of trying to study it, but it tried to also kind of say, okay, now how can we do this a little bit better and a little bit differently. And yeah, I think if I lived my life more in tune with Cardano principles, not to get too culty, my life would probably be better for it.
I think there's some
Cardano
merit there.
principles.
Cardano principles. But that's what
Applies to,
that's what it's all about. The
yeah.
community. That's why we're all part of this community. Is
Mhm.
there is that common thread across everything, and it's this sort of mindset. Um,
I can't wait till I can go to some of the summits and everything. In Japan, it was canceled, but
hmm.
I'm in the process of moving to Europe, and so I'm thinking it'll be easier to go to some of these things on the continent. So I'm looking forward to that and meeting everyone. And
Well, there are meetups everywhere, like all over the world, and they meet regularly. I actually used to
Mhm.
run a meetup in Philadelphia, and uh, haven't done that in a while. But I remember the people that would come to my meetup were very intellectual people, and the
Mhm.
conversations were not about, hey, what's the price today? When's the
Yeah,
price going to go up? It was like how can we get this proof of stake thing working? And
yeah,
it's like wow, like we're really thinking. I mean, 2017, we hadn't you know proof of stake was still being developed in
yeah.
2017, and now it's like wow, everybody's talking about proof of stake.
In 2013, people were talking about proof of stake, and I don't think we thought it would take as long as it did. So that was the other part of it. When I uh we talked about ASICs and FPGAs a little bit and why I got out of Bitcoin because of centralization. Proof of stake and functional programming were actually the two things that brought me back to Cardano, because it was so clear to me, and I lost interest in crypto because like mining just doesn't work. Even as someone who mined and had like 25 Bitcoin at a long time ago now, right? Almost what, 8-9 years ago now.
Mhm.
Um, it was just clear that like everything that Charles talks about now is like, yes, that's why I got out. It's like, if you control the IP around these chips, you can constrain supply and artificially, hoard those to yourselves, and that's going to
Mhm.
result in you kind of being a major player. If you have access to cheap or free electricity, like I did as a grad student at the time, right? But on an industrial scale, like in China or in some places, if you have a cold air outside, like in Greenland or Iceland, right? So if you have geothermal power, you can do so much more, and that inherently leads to centralization
Mhm.
of the network. At least it's mining in these localities, and it's just a bad idea for a
Mhm.
decentralized system, which is the whole reason I got into it, and that's why I got out of it, because like, oh, this doesn't hold up to inspection. And so when I saw that it was written in Haskell and they had cracked proof of stake,
Mhm.
I was like, I'm down. I'm in for this. Like, sign me up. And it's really the key, I think. And it's not so inconsequential. East 2.0 trying to move over to proof of stake for 8 years. People have been saying like, oh, it's simple to switch over to proof of stake. It's not so simple. It's not so easy. And
Yeah,
so I'm
I
so
mean,
glad that we're
if
there.
Ethereum is like perfect example of that right now. Um, let's switch over to NFTs. I want to talk about NFTs.
Mm,
So, I heard you talk about in another interview about
mm,
these copycat projects in the NFT space. So, like with an NFT art project, it doesn't like it doesn't prevent people from just because it's an NFT from copying or stealing the project or the idea.
mhm.
But are copycat projects something that bother you as an artist in the space, or do you not care?
One of the first things I got heat for was defending a project called Cardano Mirrors,
Hmm.
which was literally copying other people's content and reminting it under a new policy ID.
Hmm.
And this was back when a space, but it was like 200 or 300 ADA, right? And people were, and they were like, "This is expensive." You know, it's kind of like that Indiana Jones meme. This belongs in a museum. Like everyone should be able to own a space bud for 2 ADA only, right? Like, and I defended them saying that like, they're legitimately how do you say, letting people know what they're doing. They're saying this is a copy, it's a mirror, it's not the real thing, right? And I think the really important thing to think about NFTs, and something that surprises me, is like the core technology underwriting NFTs is just like cryptographic signatures. So the same way, like you have a Cardano wallet, right?
Hmm.
Let's say there's 50 ADA in it. I can send a message to the network that I want to send from Mustafa's wallet 50 or 49 ADA, right, to me. And I'll sign it with my signature. And the network will reject it because like this doesn't compute. This doesn't hash, right? The thing about NFTs that's different is um, NFTs don't exist in like they do exist in your wallet, but at least the policy around them that is using these signatures, like anyone can send any let's take a step back. Any message on a blockchain consists of two parts: a piece of payload or content and a signature, right? So the payload of the example that I was giving earlier was like send 50 ADA. That's the content. And the signature is by Alex or by Mustafa, right?
Hmm.
If I try to send ADA from your address, the network will reject it. And if you try to send from mine, it will reject it, right? But if we send from our own address and we sign it properly, the network says, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And it allows it onto the thing. The thing that's different about NFTs is, um, you know, the network is not fact checking the content of an NFT, right? It's not saying like, is this the first space bud? Because that's not how these decentralized systems work. There are no gatekeepers. So anyone can put the same content into an NFT, but the signature will never be the same. And so the really important thing to understand about NFTs is the signature, as people call it, the policy ID in Cardano, right? Is this really core fundamental thing that makes it impossible to copy the original NFT. Because even if you copy the JPEG, the policy ID is different. And so you have, a bit of content with a signature, and it's the composite of those two things that make it what it is, right? It's like maybe if I do a bad analogy, if we have a bunch of Honda Civics, if you're driving one and I say who's what car and what driver, it's the combination of those things together that is important. It's not just the car.
Hmm.
So there could be a bunch of fake space buds driving on the highway, or a bunch of Honda Civics, but the only thing that people care about are the Honda Civics driven by Mustafa, right?
Hmm.
And you really need to be aware that just because digital mediums, anyone can copy and paste or right click save as. That's not the main point. The main point is that when you take A and you add B, A being content, B being signature, and you look at them as A, B together, that cannot be copied.
Hmm.
And so I don't really care about people who are literally copying NFTs. I do care about low effort, bad projects that are like it's funny. I didn't care about someone literally, like you could say, stealing other people's artwork because whatever. But I do care about these people, like hiring an artist on Fiverr for, you can do this for like 200 or 300 bucks,
Hmm.
and generating a bunch of like heads and a bunch of earrings and a bunch of eyes, a bunch of eyebrows, hairstyles, hats, mustaches, whatever, facial hair, face tattoos, and then just like randomly, like, I'm so tired of this. I'm so bored of it. And those copycat projects do get on my nerves because I think they're really low effort. They're, parts of them, their metadata is preserved on the blockchain forever, just like clogging up space and like adding nothing to the network. And I think the people who buy them ultimately are going to get burned, because like I just don't think it's sustainable. I wrote this tweet 2 days ago, like one of the core ideas of most cryptocurrencies is like a constrained finite supply, right? Bitcoin 20 million, ADA 45 billion. They're deflationary assets because they don't, create more of themselves. But if you're just buying a random animal NFT, like people tried to put up fake barriers, like we're the first gazelles on Cardano. So
Mm,
like as if that's a defensible space to be in,
mm,
right? Like there will be other gazelles on other chains, and there will be other animals on Cardano, and you have nothing. There's nothing there. And so rather than having 21 million Bitcoin or 45 billion ADA or 10,000 of an NFT, what my argument is that 10,000 number is actually false. Technically, it's right. Like there are only 10,000 gazelles on Cardano, but it's actually like um, you're part of a much larger population, which anyone can really add to at any point in the future.
mm,
And that's why they don't really have any intrinsic value,
mm,
or it's so hard to preserve it because, whereas Unsigs, like how many like well thought out, deep mathematical approaches to thinking about the blockchain can be the first project on Cardano. And you know what I mean? Like you just can't copy that because like one, it seems like there's not a lot of appetite for on the creative side for making stuff like that. And two, it's just like it's actually like a defensible position if you know startups, if like corporate lingo jingo whatever. You don't want to put money into things that anyone can do or anyone can copy or imitate with very little effort, right? That's what we mean by defensible space. Like
right.
want to do the Star Wars, take the high ground, right? Like be in a place where you're able to, make a last stand or something like that. So yeah, I guess you could say copycat projects bother me. Copying doesn't bother me. I think NFTs are really interesting. I'm sorry for talking so much.
That's why we brought you here. We need you to talk. We need you
Thank
to
you.
talk. We need you to talk. There's actually something about your OnSync algorithms that I'm going to bring up later
Okay.
that I think is the moat, in my opinion, that separates it from everything else. So we're going to get into that in a little bit.
Awesome.
Um, but what would you say is the most common mistake of people who aspire to launch an art NFT project?
I think I think the biggest problem is that there's no question at the heart of the thing.
Mhm.
I mean, I come from architecture, and part of being an architect, at least in my training, was like going around to museums because the dream project for any architect is to design a museum, a Guggenheim, a Bilbao, whatever, MoMA. Like these are like the pyramids of contemporary architecture, right? Like the monuments to civilization. And um, so during the course of that, I looked at a lot of art, and also I come from photography. Photography was my way into art, so I liked going to museums and looking at paintings and two-dimensional visual art. And like I just to me, art is a very serious thing. It's not like there's a difference between art and creative practice to me. And people can say it's kind of snobby or whatever, but I make a distinction between like capital A art and we
Mhm.
talk about capital A architecture. Not all buildings are architecture. Like the mini mall down the street from everyone, that's not architecture. It's a building, but it's not architecture.
Mhm.
And what we say architecture is like buildings in the built environment which represent like the culture and the civilization from which they came,
Mhm.
right? They're like, oh, that's America, that's France, that's Rome, that's China, right? Like those things are they they're like they're pieces of culture. And so for me, like everyone can do creative practice, like they can draw, they can do fridge poetry, and they can take up a ceramics class. Like that's great, and I'm all for that. But that doesn't mean it's art, and it doesn't mean that it's like for me art has some kind of like serious question about like our existence, or what does it mean to be human, right? Or something at the core of it. And I don't see like any questions in almost any of the NFT collections that I see, right? Like they're about community, they're about whatever you want to say, and that's great. But and that doesn't mean everyone has to have my perspective, but I am explicitly interested in like NFTs. What is the potential for NFTs as an art medium? That doesn't mean I think NFTs should only be for art, like and that there shouldn't be collectibles on chain, like space buds or whatever. Like, but I do get triggered a bit when I see like I love the art, like what they mean is like what I'll say. This is the thing. There's a difference between illustration and art. I have friends who are professional illustrators, like they draw the cartoons in the New Yorker or something like that, right?
Mm.
And maybe on the side, like, but that's not art, right? Like, just because something involves creative thinking doesn't make it art. And anyone who's had a kind of career in like professional creativity related industries knows that, right? But I think as a layperson, it's easy to conflate that looks like someone made it with a pencil and some colored pencils or Photoshop, whatever. So it's art, but that's really not what makes art art. So yeah, sorry.
So, I
I'm
mean,
an angry old man now.
I mean, I'd like to go with, I'd like to you to keep talking about that because
Mm.
you've defined what's not art, but like you haven't defined what it is.
So again, like uh there's some kind of question at the core of it,
I
right?
see.
Like that makes you ponder. Like so one of the I remember when I before Unsigs was like really huge, um, I used to participate in a lot more discussions on Twitter, and one guy like, I don't like the way they look. He was talking
Hmm.
about Unsigs.
Okay.
I'm like, well, Unsigs aren't really about how they look. It's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, like, for me, art is about like not what it looks like, but what it makes you think about and what it makes you, aware of or feel or but the look is almost like the last thing that matters,
Hmm.
right? And he's like, huh, I don't like that. I'm being rude or demeaning to him or whatever, but like there I don't I don't think that uh something as I think art is about communicating with people. It's about letting other people like in on a secret a little bit. There's a lot of sayings that like I like art is a lie that reveals the truth. It's just like a bit of like oil and a canvas, like a bit of cloth stretched over a bit of like, how can this thing, which is just made of like physical bits and atoms, like
Hmm.
make you feel something or like bring you to tears or make you think about life? And how can something which is in
Yeah.
this like shitty world, which is so full of whatever, like transcend it,
Yeah.
right? So for me, art is a little bit about like transcendental kind of like escape from the cycle of this birth and death and blah blah blah. We can get a little Buddhist kind of reincarnation thing, and it gets out of the bullshit of the everyday.
Hmm.
I had a friend once who told me in Japan, um, we have shampoo bottles, right? And instead of buying a new shampoo bottle, we sell bags full of shampoo. So you buy one shampoo bottle, like whatever the Pantene Pro V, let's say, and then I think they sell it in Japan and the States. And then the next time you want that shampoo, you just buy the bag. And of course, you can just buy a bag and use your old shampoo bottle if you're okay with that, right? But what they were saying and what really struck me is like they get so depressed pouring shampoo from the bag of shampoo into the bottle of shampoo because it's like, oh, another month has passed and I'm still here and I'm still doing this banal activity, which is so like meaningless and trite. It's like a marking of time, right? Like, like what is my life except for refilling the shampoo bottle,
Hmm.
right? And to me, that was a very it's like a poetic kind of realization of like the meaninglessness of life that we spend, doing all these kind of, but there's something very beautiful about it too, right? And so I don't know if that makes.
I think I got a much better gist of it now that
Mhm.
I mean my interpretation is it's meaning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Meaning. That's beautiful. One of my favorite books is this French guy, Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. And he talks about, like, I used to be a very angsty, depressed teenager, and whatever. And it's like he talks about absurdist philosophy.
Yeah.
And he says the myth of Sisyphus is like, yeah, I think the guy stole fire or something, and he was punished. And that was Prometheus, sorry. But for whatever reason, Sisyphus is being punished by the Greek gods, and he has to roll a boulder up a hill all day. He gets to the top at the end of the day, and then the boulder rolls down the hill, and the next day he has to walk back down the hill, and he has to roll it back up again. And it's kind of like the shampoo bottle, right? But in a more Greek dramatic way.
Yeah.
And but what Camus writes about is like, life is beautiful in spite of the absurdity and meaninglessness of it. Like, if you're aware of how meaningless life is, and you decide to soldier on anyway, and just like, not just get through it, but embrace it, and like and live on in spite of the meaninglessness. Like, there's something very heroic about that. Like, to not be defeated and just like cry in a pillow and, oh, what's the point of my life? There's no point of it, like, rather than doing that, like, yes, it's meaningless, but you know what? While I'm here, I'm gonna not just have a good, I'm gonna do something with it. I'm gonna use this time and this opportunity to do something, and help other people, or think about stuff, find meaning, right? And there's something very I don't know, I this there's a, it's important to me. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
No,
I
I
think
mean,
art is related to that kind of stuff, big
yeah,
questions.
yeah. Communication, meaning. Um, so how does the general art community, not the NFT art community, but the
Hmm.
general art community, how do they receive NFTs?
Oh man, I had such a weird experience. So my I I worked a lot with the art professor at U of M, who, like, I'd go to a diner down the street like multiple times a week. We'd eat these really good American sausages, and like continental breakfast kind of thing, and in this greasy diner. And we were good friends. And when I told him that, like, he's an art professor, he has a PhD in art from Scotland, whatever. I love him so much. He's like one of my favorite human beings, and I was like utterly devastated by an email exchange I had with him before I launched Unsigs. Like, I was kind of like a prodigal son, kind of like, oh, I'm getting back into art and creative practice. Here's my project. And he's like, NFTs are shitty for the environment and blah 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 blah. And like, and I was like, no, 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 no. Like, if like, this is on Cardano. Cardano's proof of stake. Like, you can run it on a Raspberry Pi. It's very lightweight, low footprint. But and he just wasn't having it. And like, it's really surprising to me. My brother has a startup where he's trying to make like anime Twitter comics, like on like social media from first person. And he's releasing, I think, an NFT collection. And like, just like the mainstream hip thing to do is to shit on NFTs because they're bad for the environment. Like, and it's, you don't have, I'm very surprised, because I'm definitely in like the Twitter crypto bubble and the NFT bubble, and like, it's all support and love in there. But like, the dominant thing, the things that I hear over and over again is they're bad for the environment. And of course, as an architect, we care a lot about carbon footprint and embodied energy, and reducing, because buildings are actually, I think, more impactful than automotive cars, right? Than in terms of the amount of energy that humans use. But that thing, and the other thing is just links to JPEGs. Like, you're not even buying the thing. It's just a link to a JPEG. It's just a receipt, right? It's not the actual art. Those two attacks I hear all the time. And I think, most artists are kind of like woke individuals who care about the environment and that kind of thing. So there's this whole swath of people who seem to have just like written off NFTs because of Ethereum. And I roll my eyes, and I think like, oh my God, you guys are so stupid. And people who are maybe like you, who are more patient than people like me, like, we need to communicate to these people that I jokingly, not all men hashtag, like, not all NFTs, right? Like, not all NFTs are bad for the environment, and not all NFTs are just links to JPEGs, right?
Hmm.
Those are my two kind of pet peeves that if I let them be pet thieves, it would destroy me, and I'd just be like a shell of a human who was like constantly triggered. But I just decided not to let it bother me, and just to like live my life in spite of it. And I'm just waiting for the day when like people can hear and realize, oh wow, not all NFTs are, use more electricity than a human does in a year in Switzerland, and this kind of stuff. So yeah, but I think it's been pretty negative. I think a lot of people are trying to cash in on it now recently. There's some people, but overall, like the enlightened view is that NFTs are bad for the environment. And it's
Mhm.
like, oh my God, there's something very pretentious and at the same time ignorant about that.
Well, if there are any people who know artists that are on the verge of want to know more about NFTs, then people should send them videos like this one
Yeah.
so they can hear the conversation about what's going on the inside, and maybe that'll help. But
And yeah,
sometimes you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't always make the horse drink.
I mean, I tried to reason with him. Like this guy, he flies to Japan, he flies to Europe, he flies all around the world for different, gallery shows or expositions. And like, I'm like, your carbon footprint doing this and like shipping your art all around the world is much higher than mine releasing an edit. But he just had closed his ears. And it was just like so sad that, you know, people don't think that NFTs can actually be better for art or better for the environment than traditional art practice. You know, that I think that if I do this, like I want to go on the offense and like, do that. Like I can do Zoom calls with you from my desk. I can anyone can go on fire up a web browser and see my art and get that experience. And we don't have to of course there is something valuable about human presence and contact and that kind of thing. But if you want to throw mud at me for being environmentally unfriendly, be careful because you might, be standing in a pile of mud or pile of pig shit whatever, and you actually might have more of an environmental footprint than me, so
Mhm.
watch out. I don't know.
I think the narrative proof of stake is starting to get out there now and more into the general public. So more people are going to realize it's not always like with Ethereum, you're not always like burning, the ozone or whatever.
Yeah,
With mining, with Cardano, it's not like that at all. And the whole purpose of proof of stake and everything like that is to, yeah.
I always say that Cardano and proof of stake runs on game theory, whereas proof of work and Bitcoin Ethereum run on entropy and math. And so it's a very different engine which powers it. And we don't have to unpack that too much, but basically, like you're mining for random numbers in proof of work, and in proof of stake it's designed using game theory to balance the interests of a diverse group of people to create like a equilibrium kind of condition which allows the network to assign blocks rather than to race to blocks. And because they're assigned, it's so much more energy efficient than everyone trying to solve the same math problems over and over and over. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's my
So what's in it for the NFT creator after the initial launch?
I don't know a lot. There's of course just the royalty discussion, which seems to be a hot one, which I don't really get. Like, it seems like a lot of people in the buying side of the community feel like commissions or royalties are stealing or a form of tax, and I actually don't think that. I think that like the weirdest thing about art has always been one of the weirdest things about art as it relates to living and daily life is that artists can often die penniless, and people who have nothing to do with like the creation of that art are the ones that make tons of money off of it. And that always put a weird taste in my mouth, right? And so I've actually decided, and I would encourage people, like, I don't think anyone should ever buy an NFT from now on, and I will never sell another NFT. I don't think I will basically be funding, or any NFT will be minted like gratis for free, or for like the base, like just a round trip cost, and will include a royalty when maybe that royalty is higher than other NFT projects. Because I think the point is, like, if something has traction and weight and people want it, that is how I should earn my living, is like if it's validated, right? And I think by doing that, what that precedent that would set is that these 10K NFT money grab drops, these copycat projects, will basically be killed, because the reason they exist is there's a financial incentive for someone to release some low effort work, make a couple 100,000 ADA, um, because all these people are hoping that they get a rare one and that they can flip it, on a marketplace and 10x or 20x or 50x. But if if quality artists give away their work for free, what incentive is there for people to pay for shit? Like, why would you pay for I'm trying to think what that crappy USS car was, or a Ford Pinto. Not, it's not the USS car, but a crappy, right? Why would you pay for a Ford Pinto when people are giving out Teslas for free? Right. And if the Tesla, every time it's more of like a subscription model, right? Where anytime the transaction changes hands, if you sell your NFT for 10 ADA, I get 0.5 ADA. Sell it for 100 ADA, I get 5 ADA, right? Something like that. And as that kind of volume builds and goes on, if a project actually has legs and is popular, then the artist or the team behind it makes money. But that, I think, is kind of I'd say like a moral responsibility, not to get too ethical, or I know morals and ethics are different, but like of people who have had success and have like some foot in the space, to maybe defang some of the like nastier aspects of the space right now, where I think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money when this whole NFT bubble pops, and they're sitting on a bunch of useless links to JPEG animals that are like, it's just going to be sad. But I mean, yeah.
So for me, it's the only reason I'm buying NFTs is because I think it's a cool thing, like just
Mm-hmm.
profile picture or whatever. Um, but you're saying those people that are buying them to flip them, they're in for some bad news in the future.
I don't think it's sustainable, and I'm willing to be proven wrong. I'd be happy to be proven wrong. I've read some interesting counter hypotheses by like Raoul Paul, or Alex Becker, on like, I don't understand like NFT culture and like the new thing, and how the new economy, clout and all the social media influence and all, and that's true. Like, I'm not a big social media person. I don't really partake in it, and so that's definitely, I'm 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 not saying I'm right. I'm saying this is what I think will happen. If
Hmm.
it's not true, then I'm wrong. So what? And I'm not trying to give anyone financial advice, but I don't see how all these projects that are just cranked out, and I just can't tell them one from the other, right?
Hmm.
There's a different animal, there's a different whatever. I don't see how that can continue. It's like there's no such thing as perpetual motion. Like, this thing just can't keep going, and I think we're already starting to see evidence of that. I've been kind of isolated in my successful NFT bubble, and when I go out to the cNFT marketplaces and I look at the number of projects that have 8 ADA, which is like the minimum you can list an NFT for on cNFT.io as their like de facto price,
Hmm.
and they might have minted for 50 or 75 ADA, whatever. Like, it's like, oh yeah, it's actually pretty rough out there. And I think what people are, I think the future that I'm talking about actually exists today, but people
Yeah,
just haven't realized it. Like, it's already kind of popped.
yeah. Diminishing returns are
Yeah.
kind of being seen right now. So with in general, I think my opinion is that there's got to be a different business model. That sort of like that 10,000 NFT project launch. That model sort of might have worked at one point, but maybe there's
Mhm.
something that we haven't thought of yet. But I'd be curious to see what happens in the
I
future.
want to just to break into that a little bit. One thing that people are really pushing for is gaming and utility. But if you look at the economics around like releasing a AAA game, like how many millions of people have to buy that game? Like, my big question is, how is a 10,000 NFT collection any different than like a pay to win game?
Mhm.
Right? Like, I guess, of course, it can be a skin like Fortnite or CS:GO or whatever, right? It's cosmetic only kind of thing. But like, I don't really understand how 10,000 is a large number when it comes to like NFTs, but it's a small number when it comes to like number of customers in a AAA game, right? And so how are these two realities about like we're going to develop a great game from a 10,000 NFT drop? Like
Mhm.
I don't understand how those two things, how you're going to square that circle, or like make a sense of those two kind of very different scales of businesses, right? Because
Yeah.
games require millions of customers to be successful, and good games that people actually want to play games, right? They require a lot of developers, a lot of talent, a lot of time. Of course there's good indie games and that kind of thing, but it's a very, I don't know, weird thing to me that when people are like, oh, we're going to release a game, and like somehow that's going to change the dynamic of a 10,000 NFT drop. But
Mhm.
I'm not a big gamer anymore, so I don't really know.
Yeah, well, I think the space of art NFTs is, I think there's definitely distinction between the gaming and the art.
Yep.
I'm curious. I really haven't done very much research on the gaming, but I could imagine what that would be like because in the, sort of games like World of Warcraft that I've used, I've played in the past, there are already in-game items that people pay
Yep.
lots of in-game money for that actually people pay real money for.
Yeah.
So the
I
context
sold a
already
lot on
exists.
EverQuest and WoW, like accounts and
Yeah.
horses and all that kind of
I
stuff.
think I had a relative who he played this game World of Warcraft for so long, and he built up all these characters in the game that
Hmm.
he sold the characters, and like after like 3 or 4 years of like playing the game, he looked at it and he did the math and he found that he was making like a minimum wage or something like that over
Yeah,
four
it's
years
not a
and
lot.
playing
I
this
mean,
game.
you can sell the thing for a couple $1,000s, but when you calculate, you do slash played in the game, it tells you how many hours you played in it. It's like congratulations, like a McDonald's employee earned like double the wage of you. It's not even minimum wage. If you want to get like a solid character in one of these MMOs, you're earning like $1 to $2 an hour, which is why all these gold farming operations
Yeah.
are set up in China or in developing countries where they can farm out that thing, and that's a decent wage, but it's not in a developed country. So, yeah.
Yeah, but the whole sort of metaverse thing is kind of interesting to me. Where,
Hmm.
yeah, there's I don't know how I feel about it. Like where I don't think I'm going to be spending a lot of time. We already really spend like this is the metaverse.
Yeah.
We're already there, so I don't know what are they thinking. Like, are they just going to make a game layer on top of it, or like a three-dimensional meta? Like Decentraland, or and then how many people are actually going to be using that a lot? So I don't know what's going to happen in the future.
I think we're very far out from it, and I don't think it will be a project that anyone like. I don't. There's a few like triggers. What if I see someone is like building a metaverse? Like, nope. Like you're not. Like no one is going to build a metaverse. The metaverse, I think, will be an emergent thing
Mm,
that is like weaved together from many things that exist.
mm.
It's not going to be like, oh yeah, let's go on to the metaverse.
Like the internet, like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
yeah.
it's a metaverse, right? It's not
Right.
the metaverse, right?
Mhm.
Like and I don't know. That to me screams of like cash grab, and like I don't know how anyone who's serious about engineering would think that like they have the chops or the ability or the team to build a metaverse. Like it's
Mhm.
just nonsense.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, gaming metaverses or gaming worlds are a kind of metaverse, you could say. Um,
You can build stuff that could be used in a metaverse, right?
yeah.
Like and almost by definition, everything that we build now is like kind of could be deployed in a future metaverse. But to say that you are
Mm.
building the metaverse is just like it's like I don't know, it's like a fool's errand, or like I'm building a space elevator. Like, no, you're not. You got a trampoline in your backyard. Like, shut up.
Have you been researching about this Bondly Finance Ethereum Cardano NFT bridge? There,
I haven't. Can you? I'm interested in cross chain
I
stuff. If you can.
I don't. I haven't really. I just read about it in the news. I
Mhm.
was curious to know if you
I
had
think I've
any
seen some Twitter
insider
ads,
information
right?
on that. Yeah,
No.
I saw. I just saw that there was an announcement. I'm like, well, what if you could now bring all your NFTs over from any chain? Like, like that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
I mean, what's very interesting to me how different chains have different cultures of NFTs.
Mm, Yes, sir.
I took a few anthropology courses in undergrad, and it was like quite interesting, like applying that kind of thing, this understanding, like what is important to a culture, like what are its totems, what are its kind of like
Hmm.
rituals, right?
Interesting.
And Cardano definitely has like a unique subculture within the NFT culture
Hmm.
of something else that it feels different to me than Solana. And it feels different to me in a lot of ways. I'd say like the serious art that I'm interested in,
Hmm.
I don't really see it so much on Cardano. I do see it on Ethereum, and so it's kind of weird to me, right? Because I look at the stuff and I think that I think part of that has to do with smart contracts, in that because smart contracts were live on Ethereum when NFTs were happening. There's more people that are, I feel, interrogating the medium of what an NFT can be, and also this interesting kind of point that because NFTs on Ethereum are built inside of smart contracts, they also have something that we don't really have, which I'm trying to figure out right now in my next kind of project, which is like how to figure out on-chain execution as it relates to NFTs, and not just have it be a bit of code which is rendered in a browser or in a on a desktop somewhere else. So yeah.
I had an interview with Victor Zhang over at Alpha Wallet, and he also does. He's got an NFT project, um, not an art NFT project, but
Hmm.
actually he's coding NFTs. He's coding a
Hmm.
software for NFTs that allows them
Hmm.
to be utilized in different. Like he was describing how you could take a game item from one game and use it in another one.
Hmm.
Um, you might be interested in that, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that kind of, I won't, it's not even cross chain, but it's a little bit of like mini metaverse kind of thing, like being able to take one thing out of the domain it was made in and have it, take a
and,
sword from Diablo and put it into WoW, right? Like,
yeah, but also take the attributes of it over with you as
yeah,
well.
exactly. Not just a 3D model of it, right?
Right.
But like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Let me talk to you about unsigned algorithms. So how'd you come up
Hmm.
with the name?
So one, the second part is easy algorithm. Like it's about like a code. It's about like a series of steps which produces. I think algorithm is actually what do you call it? What's the Middle Eastern language? Is it what is a it's not, it's like a Persian word or Arabic word? No, algorithm or something like that. Let me
Well, I
Google
speak Arabic,
etymology.
so
Yeah,
I'm not like that, expert.
let me see. Al Khwarizmi, the
Hmm.
man of Khwarizm. Yeah, it is an Arabic word. It'd be fun to look into it, I think.
There, I
Ninth
mean, I
century
know.
Persian mathematician, but
Uh-huh.
the idea is like, mathematically, it's just like a series of steps,
Uh-huh.
right? That's all. When people say algorithm, they get like, oh, it's magic, or what is that, right? An algorithm, and as defined in this, like a Persian mathematician thing, is just, it's just like a step. It's just it's a cookbook, right?
Okay.
Is what an algorithm is.
Hmm.
And unsigned, there has like I love double entendres. I love like layers of meaning, and like onions, right? Peeling back. And so one, I just thought it was funny to release an art collection that was unsigned, right? Like, because the signature is usually what, like Pablo Picasso or whatever is like, gives a collection value. Um, Second, that also has, we were talking about contents and signatures as it relates to blockchain. That has another layer of meaning in the context of art that is supposed to be of a blockchain on a blockchain. That is, I'm calling unsigned, but it is signed. And then the last layer down is integers are whole numbers that don't have decimals, right?
Hmm.
Are key to the math behind unsigs, as they're kind of shortened to, and a specific kind of integer. Usually, you remember like Nintendo 64 was a 64-bit machine, right? Usually, you have like computers have like a bit depth, or that they can process, right? Like 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit. And usually, when you assign a number to a bit to say like, this is how much memory I'm going to use to keep track of this number, Usually half of the number is below zero, or half of that range is below zero, and half of that range is above zero, because we don't know if we're going negative or we're going positive, right? And this number should be do it. But when you have an unsigned integer, you're saying I'm actually not going to keep track of if it's positive or negative. And what that does is it doubles the size of numbers you can count, but it's only in one direction. It's only in positive,
I
right?
see.
And so because we're only counting up, uh, unsigned integers were a key part of the thing, and also a kind of happy accident which happened, which was you've seen unsigs have all these kind of lines and curves in them, right? That occur a little bit similar to your background wallpaper behind you, but more curvy kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, all those lines are a result of a weird bug that happened initially that I figured out what was going on, and I figured out how to control it.
Mhm.
So originally, I don't know, do you know what a no liner is in unsig parlance?
No.
It's just these color washes of like, they just look like gradients of colors that are just, there's no like discontinuity in them. Like it's just like some pink, some
Oh,
blue,
okay.
some green, right? And like
Hmm.
there's no
Yeah, there's
there's no
no
like
lines. Yeah.
break in it, right? And
Yeah.
those are quite uncommon in the collection, so
I see. Yeah.
people kind of ascribe value to them, and they're called no liners. But
Okay.
originally the entire collection was just no liners,
I see.
um, until I figured out this weird thing that was happening as a bug of Python programming. uh, this is funny. Python is dynamically typed, so you don't, and inferred type, so you don't have to say like this is an integer or a float, or you don't have to say what the variable is. And somehow I had made a mistake in the code, which caused part of the one of the variables to be thought of as an unsigned integer. The other part of that weird thing about unsigned integers that happens that I talk about is when you exceed the bit range of an unsigned integer, like let's say you have from 0 to 255, if you have 250 and you try to add 10 to it, you get back to 5, right? And so I often also use this scene in the Matrix. This is version 1. You've probably seen me talk about this, but where you go so far, you come back to where you were, right? That's the concise version of the
Oh,
idea. So that kind of aspect of it, I thought all those layers of, the actual math is using, and the actual programming is using unsigned integers, which is kind of key to the collection. um and the signature aspect of cryptography, and the art nature of signing your work. I thought it was a very like a fun name for it. And then Ashna, my wife, actually, I always misspell the word algorithm.
oh.
And so we thought like for as a web address, unsigned algorithms would be a horrible thing, because like no
Yeah.
one would ever land on the website. And so like we were falling asleep one night, and she's like, Unsigs. What if it was? And I'm just so, it's one of the funnier things. Like people always talk about unsigs now, and maybe more so than unsigned algorithms, right? It's almost like more dominant as a name. Like, wait, what are you talking about? Unsigned algorithms? What's that?
Yeah.
Unsigs. Oh yeah, yeah, I know unsigs, right? But I think that it's kind of, it's very fun how I feel like in this small little bubble community of people, we were able to like make a new word, which is now like a mean something. It's funny.
I like it. I'm a fan. Um, so the unsigs, they when you look at them, they evoke a feeling of joy and happiness, at least for me.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that was the thing that I wanted to say earlier.
Hmm.
Was that's what I think it's really separates. I think that from. I mean, you can. There's a lot of NFTs out there. And they don't really do anything for me, but some of them look cool, right? But yours,
Hmm.
like the whole entire collection. I mean, they sort of evoke a feeling, and you can't say that about other NFT projects. But there seems to be some kind of aesthetic element in it that I really like, or my brain really likes. Were you aware of that when you were putting together, putting the
Yeah.
algorithm together?
So I'll explain a little. There's multiple things going on there. So one of my favorite painters is this guy called Mark Rothko, who makes these like super. I wouldn't call them super minimal. Actually, compared to minimal artists, he's quite complex.
Hmm.
But it's usually just like a very simple color, and then like a large square and a small rectangle, kind of adjacent to each other. And there's a quote of his like, a painting isn't about an experience, it is an experience. Like what do you say, like it's about like the kind of like emotions and feelings it's meant to evoke. And
Mm-hmm.
so um I used to say it was a color study. I think that the better phrasing or verbiage for Unsigs is like it's a study of color, because a color study actually has like it's a rough painting you do before you make a painting to kind of like figure out what color palette you might want to use. And so that kind of makes sense in Unsigs. But really, one of the questions that I had is like, what does it look like if you arrange all the colors in all the ways possible? And as like a simple reductive statement. And one thing that's very interesting to me is that they do the simple act of these colors is sometimes it's joy, as you said, but like people have like emotional experiences looking at their Unsigs,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of amazing to me, right? Like
Yeah.
if that someone looking at a screen of like electronic pixels can look at it and like like feel something is just like an insane thing to me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm very happy and very proud of it.
Yeah.
The other part of it is that I told you I used to do AI development, and there's nothing about AI in Unsigs. People get confused, algorithm and AI and Facebook, blah blah blah. An algorithm is not AI. An algorithm is just a procedure or a series of steps.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I used to do, I'll give you an example from my boring old life, was in Japan. We were working on like a TikTok type video system, and one of the features that we had in this app was that like you could you could pinch a clip out of a larger video and share it to like Twitter or whatever social media you wanted to do, Facebook. And so if you're watching like a 30-minute video and you like pinch 5 to 10 seconds out of it, like a highlight of the video to share, right, as a clip, um, we wanted to have the hashtags of the actors who appeared in that segment pre-populated in the thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what I did was I came up with this like AI system that it was just face recognition, the same way that like if you upload a photo to Facebook, it knows who's in it. I trained a simple AI image recognition thing to look for Japanese celebrities. So first I Googled I went to Wikipedia, I got a list of like 1,000 Japanese celebrities. I built up a data set by automatically downloading, like 2,000 photos of each celebrity that I found online, programmatically with Python, just to
Mm-hmm.
go back to where we were doing, right?
Yeah.
And then saying, there was a bunch of bad data in there. Some of it was like photos of dogs and it wasn't the celebrities. So we had to clean that data set, whatever. But then what these image or vision algorithms tend to do is they tend to have, if you've heard this thing, deep learning, there tends to be multiple layers of very simple operations doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And if each layer gets like progressively more and more complex in what it's looking for, because it starts to composite things together. But the early layers of deep learning networks are very simple patterns, like a vertical line, a horizontal line, a diagonal line, some very simple color combinations, because from those things you can build everything else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like give me a straight line that meets a curvy line, and then another curvy line, and then that makes a circle, and a circle is part of an eye, right? Like you can imagine, like when you break down visual things, like there's only so many things. And so one of the things that I think, and someone in the community, this guy called Ohm Design, and he's like, Unsigs are kind of like a steel scrub brush to your brain or to your visual cortex. Because usually when you and I are looking at reality, like there's so much complexity. Like this is, I'm just picking this. This is like my AC remote. It's a goddamn rectangle and a circle, and there's buttons, and there's all this like Japanese lines and letters on it, right? Like your brain has to do so much processing and thinking to kind of take it in.
Mm-hmm.
And what Unsigs kind of are, maybe in a way, it's kind of like music. Like music interacts with your brain, like if classical music, let's say, on like a purely abstract level, right? Like maybe some music sounds a bit like animal sounds or whatever, but it's kind of like its own thing, often in its own part of your brain. And I think Unsigs are kind of operating on a very low level, part of it, like below, if your life is consisted of apps, and like your basic body is kind of like an OS, like Windows or Mac OS or Linux, like Unsigs are kind of like lower level, I think, than OS or apps, at least, right? Where they're like interacting with like the basic building blocks of your visual cortex. And so especially when you look at one full screen and it's like the dominant thing you look at, it almost kind of hypnotizes you in a way.
Yeah.
Because like your brain is finding patterns, and like it's kind of like a very relaxing thing, I think, like as a way to unwind or just like turn off at the end of the day. I don't
I
know.
think
Maybe
also
I'm smoking my own.
the color itself, the different colors also have evoke different feelings as well.
It's my, as someone who's had success, I think anyone who's had success, they get very like self-aware about being a one note, right? Like, or the pressure around succeeding again, like, was this a one hit wonder or whatever? And so your sophomoric album tends to have a lot of pressure around it. And so one of the things that I've decided to do to try to counter this idea that I got lucky and that it was a fluke or whatever, right, is and not to be typecast into like the color gradient guy, is that my next collection I'm working on has no color in it. And it's so if Unsigs were more like painting, this is more like sculpture, right? Like it's just like like marble has a little bit of texture to it, right? But just like white plaster, you can imagine, right? Like how can you do something with that? And that's my, like, I'm an architect. Most of my training is more about like spatial and three-dimensional things, and so I'm having fun with that. But this is just to say, I'm realizing now, working on these like white undifferentiated masses, like how important color was to Unsig success, right? Like with that, like it's so much harder like to make someone like think or feel something without color in there, right? Because like the color is just like a shortcut to like a childhood memory, or like like mom's kind of cooking or whatever. Like there's so much things that color triggers that when you take that out, this is just to get back to your kind of question or point about colors and whatnot. Like it's like, wow, like color is such a powerful thing, and I kind of wish that I could kind of grab a little bit of it, and bring it back in, because I'm telling you, man, it's hard.
Yeah, because you're stimulating that part of the brain, and if you go to something without color, you're not working off that. You're not operating off that anymore.
Yeah, it's like fighting with the hand behind your back, right? Like it's such an important tool to have that it's difficult.
It's
I don't know if
sounds
I
like
might
quite a
cheat. I
challenge.
might I might try to bring it back in if I can't figure it out. I'm hoping I figure it out, but yeah.
I have faith in you.
Thank you.
So your work has a refreshing air of minimalism and just clean simplicity to it. Could you tell us what influenced that approach in your design?
Oh, I'm just a stereotypical architect.
Okay.
Like there's like, if you Google like why do architects wear black, like this will be an autocomplete as you like, why do as you get to like it will be like wear black. Like there's an idea in architecture. I think the usual explanation is like, when we're presenting our work to other people, we want people to focus on the work and not us, right? And so like if we have a bright outfit on or something, right, and if it clashes with the design of the thing on the wall behind us, whatever, like, well, it's mostly just about like minimalism again, and
Yeah.
like like Steve Jobs or whoever, like not having to think about what you're wearing is a very freeing thing,
Yeah.
right? A few times I'm not doing it today, but like I just have a bunch of black t-shirts and black jeans, and then I just like, I don't have like, I never spend any time every day making a decision at my wardrobe. What am I going to wear today? It's like a foregone conclusion. Like that's what you're wearing. And I'll tell you my best life hack. I threw away all my socks, and I only bought one pair of socks. And I bought like 20 pairs of the same socks. And I never have to match socks in my life. Do you know, like I'm
Yeah.
never, because they all match,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I just love it. And I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
jealous of my friends who have, all these cool socks and different patterns, but I'm like, oh God, that would be such a nightmare doing laundry, trying to find like, the green checkered one and the other green checkered one. And like,
Form over function, right? Oh, function over
Function
form.
over form, right?
I always get
Exactly.
that mixed
Yeah,
up.
yeah, it's okay. I
Yeah.
did it too. So I'm a poser, but that kind of sensibility about what is this thing. It's almost like English definition, right? Like or any language definition.
Mm.
If you think about what this thing is, a lot of my friends will criticize me, and you did it in a nicer way. Like, I tend to define things by what they're not. Like, let's say it's not all that stuff, right? And okay, we're left with this thing, and what is it? And it's a lot harder. It's much easier for me to say what something is not, and then to kind of like work with what is left over. I get that can be a little bit critical or downer kind of approach. Like, that's not, and then but what is it? But there is this kind of what was your question? Where do we start with this thing?
Well, I
I
mean,
was like,
how did minimalism enter your approach? Like,
yeah. So
what
I
influenced?
think the point is not to be minimalistic, right? For me, one of my favorite professors said, like, he's a very cool architect. He does a lot of cool stuff and like a lot of trendy kind of cool places. But some clients will come and we're like, "What's your style?" And he had a really great answer. He's like, "Well, I hope I never have a style. Like, I hope the point is like I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to hear what you are saying, like, I need a barber salon, I need a whatever, right? Like, and I'm going to come up with a solution to your query, to your problem and your lifestyle and your predicament that solves your problem."
Mhm.
um the funny thing is like, to a layperson, you know, people would be like, but all his stuff is like orthogonal, square, straight lines, and minimalistic. And but that, it's kind of not really the point. Like, the point is like, you listen and you hear and you understand what's going on, and then you come up with a response to it. And style is almost kind of like my clothes that I was talking about. Like, it's a default pattern you adopt if you're not thinking.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like, and I think the whole point of design or art is that I'm okay with using a style or a uniform in my clothes because they aren't important to me. I
Mhm.
don't care what I look like, and I don't care about this stuff. And so I want to preserve my attention and my brain and my decision making, reservoir when I wake up every day for things that actually do matter to me. And so I don't want a style, like, they happen to be abstract. Again, I working on this like no color thing feels a lot more minimal to me than all the colors that are going on in Unsigs, but um they are, the point is not to be minimalistic. If you arrive at minimalism after your like set of decisions and process, then that is what it is. um
Mhm.
I don't know.
I think that's what attracted me to it is the minimalistic approach
Hmm.
is everything I do is sort of approached from that
Hmm.
perspective as well. Like whenever I have to come up with some kind of logo design or something like that, and they always ask me like, "What colors do you want?" I always just default to black and white, black and white. That's it.
Strong. Well, you did that with again, the wallpaper is a popular. You got these little unsigs on in the background right there.
Exactly. Trying to keep it so.
It's cool.
I do need a little bit of color in my life though. That's
It's very
something.
graphic. Yeah, I do like accent color. I probably in my life until now, it's all mostly monochromatic. It's like my favorite phones were those like Google Pixel phones
Mhm.
with like the neon aquamarine or orange power buttons on the left. Like, it was just a black phone with a tiny little splash of color someplace, right? Like,
Yeah.
I always thought that was a fun thing.
Just a touch of it, right?
Yeah.
So, um, now, do you want your work to be seen as standalone, or do you want people to know that it's part of a collection?
I think the entire work, the entire collection is a single work,
Hmm. I
right?
see.
Like, I don't, and that's kind of important for like why there are 31,119 of them, right? Like, um, which I got a lot of shit for. Like, what, an NFT drop is supposed to be 10,000 pieces. What are you doing, right? Like, how can you do that, right? And the point for me is that most NFT collections are built using like a random grab of parameters, right? Like, there's 10,000 of these, and like 0.1% are golden bananas and 0.2% are rockets. And, like, there's some kind of like Excel sheet that says what the rarity is, right? What unsigs were say I took a very different approach. I said, no, unsigs are the study of color over all the ways we can combine them. But if we took all the ways we combine them, there's way too many. It's like over 50 million ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with a second set of rules, which basically called out the vast majority of unsigs, like 99.9% of them, and left like 30,000 remaining. And that's where it got to be this idea of like the tumor versus the healthy tissue. Like I tried to cut away as much as I could to get to like this core and this essential thing. And it felt like I think there were like 83 versions of this thing, you know, that I kept kind of what I started with and these different rules that I kept kind of interested to see what I could and couldn't include and come up with these different steps in the algorithm to reduce down to. Um, and then in the end, you know, I felt like if I added any more rules, I'd be cutting away things that I actually wanted to include. And I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to cleverly do it. So like, um, you know, the easiest example to explain is there was this time when an unsig had every orientation possible for that unsig. So if you think of like the north version, the east, south, and west, like every unsig had you could kind of array them into like a mandala. Swastika is the wrong word, but like that kind of, you know, that where you could think about the upper right, upper left, bottom right, not swastika, sorry, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
This like rotational symmetry thing that can go. There was every version of every unsig that way, but I decided, as an example of a trade-off, it was more important to me that I have subtle color shifts. So I added in this idea of like a half color, which is where that 0.5 multiplier comes in, because I wanted there to be more kind of subtle color gradations possible. And so I was willing to cut out 75% of the collection, which was just the same thing, but rotated in a different way, so that I could add in subtle color, more subtle, even more subtle color variations. They were already a lot of color combinations, right? But when you add in this kind of like halfway color of like halfway red, halfway green, halfway blue, which is what the 0.5 is, you can get a more like a kind of off key color, which, you know, was more important to me than having the same thing represented in 4 different ways: north, south, east, west. We'll go with that one versus the other one I said, right? As a thing. So those kind of questions and trade-offs, which were what kind of drove the collection. And so that's why I'm saying the entire every unsig is a piece of like a single work, which was your thing. Like, is it a single thing or is it a you know, an individual unsig? And like they're all kind of part of this larger tapestry of this thing. And to me, it doesn't really make sense. I'll give you a practical example of this, why I think it's important. There have been a few unsigs that were stolen, right? Like stolen is the wrong word. They were scammed, right? Because the owner willingly sent it to someone else under some false pretenses. Like someone thought they were in escrow, or they were how do you say, they you know, they didn't use escrow and they just sent it, and the person didn't send any ADA back because they were just like DMing in Discord or something. This happened like to like 5 or 6 things. And people have proposed to make a blacklist, like we should never buy or sell these unsigs because they were stolen, right? I get what they're doing. They're trying to say we shouldn't let the person who stole it win by being able to offload these things. But to me, that really like attacks the work, because I don't like the idea of a piece of the collection being written off, right? Like if you're gonna like blacklist one of them, blacklist all of them. Do you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just selectively like shut down 5 or 6 things because of something that happened in a secondary market. I'm sad that someone lost money, right? And I'm sad that for some people, like this was a significant part of their net worth. That's not a happy thing. But at the same time, I think like uh again, like art is in this world but not of it. And so like if the art doesn't like rise above these kind of like petty things of like stealing and all this other kind of stuff, like I think it would just be very sad to me. And I also don't know how you scale that. Like how do you, right now we can kind of like trust that this person says that they were stolen, but who's to say if I sell some unsigs to you like we're friends, right? And then I fight with you and I say, oh, you know what, I want to fuck him over. I'm going to say he stole them from me, right? Like there's no way to verify that, right? And so we can't really sustainably scale this idea of blacklisting unsigs or whatever, right? And or any NFT really. And so I
Mhm.
just don't think that's a, it gets to the reason I'm talking about it, this idea that the entire work is part of all the unsigs are part of one thing, and
Mhm.
that thing is kind of I hope that that is kind of preserved and legible, and not,
Mhm.
it's not about any one unsig, it's about all of them in their entirety.
So do they all fit together sort of like a puzzle?
They can. I mean, there's especially if you go in the Discord now, there's a very good
Mm,
bot that was programmed. You can like put in your unsig number, and it will tell you what unsigs match it on the other
I
sides,
see.
and even which unsigs match that are for sale, so that you can see um, people build these larger compositions up, right? Which was one of my main ideas actually before the collection was dropped. You know, I really don't like this idea of rarity. You know, like that looks rare or whatever is like a meme in the NFT world. Um, the idea that I had was that the rarity, one aspect of rarity is like, what unsigs do you have? Because if you have this unsig, you might want that unsig, and to everyone else, that other matching unsig is just like another unsig,
Mhm.
right? Like there's nothing like that would jump off the page to them about it. But if you kind of like puzzle piece them together, I think the largest pattern that has been made is like 2 by 3 or maybe 2 by 4, right? Unsigs together. It's quite hard to continue to match them on and on and on and on and on forever. And so I think if like it's a very nice thing while we're playing these kind of marketplace rarity games, this idea that you kind of like build this thing up from the constituent parts rather than have it given to you by
Mhm.
chance,
Mhm.
right? Like what, at the end of the day, a lot of NFT drops are basically just slot machines, right? You put in 50 ADA and you hope you get back a rare one. And what I like is that there's this idea that through organizing information, you know, you can take a common set of like 5 or 6 common unsigs and turn it into something very rare through your work of like trawling over the marketplace late at night and finding this one, finding that one. And then one guy built up this quite cool, he's calling it the Peacefield Diamond. It's like a set of, and he has a Twitter account now for it where he like tweets out from the perspective of his set of NFT, his set of unsigs. It's quite funny.
Yeah,
So
it's amazing how communities are being built around these. Just boggles my mind, but at the same time, it just makes me happy to see that.
I wonder if it would all work if we didn't have COVID. Like if we
Uh,
weren't all stuck at home, like would any of this like
hmm.
focus on online communities and all these kind of things? Like I think it is possible. I think, you know, a lot of us blame it on COVID. My sneaking suspicion is that most of the people in this space were probably more like at home introverted people before COVID anyways, and we all like to pretend like, oh, it's only because of COVID that I'm online all the time
It's a
doing
great
all this stuff.
excuse. It's a great excuse.
Right? Like we all pretend like we're these extroverted, like happy people who had tons of friends, but you know, really like all these people in these online communities
Mhm.
are just like we've come home, you know, like we found our people.
Yeah, culture is definitely changing, and maybe it wasn't. COVID might have not been 100% of the reason why, but it was
Hmm.
probably a heavy piece.
Yeah,
Maybe
a
at
part of the
least
story for sure.
at least maybe half of it.
Really, yeah.
Could be, but so would you ever consider launching NFTs on other chains, or would you, if
I
it,
got approached
yeah.
after like early on after we sold out and when the, you know, we were in like peak unsig land. I think a few different Ethereum artists came up to me and or in my DMs, and they were interested in, and I thought about it, and I was honestly willing to do it at that time, because I thought like art is more important than technology, right?
Hmm.
And so like I thought like at the end of the day, like thousands of years from now, when like we're not around or whatever, like and someone like discovers artifacts of our culture, like it's really not going to be important. Was this on Cardano or was this on Ethereum or was it on this, right? But I will say I think it's more likely that Cardano will continue to exist in the future. Maybe not thousands of years, but
Mhm.
for hundreds of years. And if something exists for hundreds of years, it's more likely to be found thousands of years from now, right? But the funny thing is like I learned how screwed up other chains are when it comes to minting NFTs.
Right.
Like I tuned out and I stopped talking to in this Discord where they were asking me because like they were trying to figure out like their minting smart contract on Ethereum, and like there's a controversy about like if you mint under like OpenSea's contract versus your own, like it's more preferable to mint under your own and blah 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 blah. And like it just was so complicated. I'm like, look, guys, like you could do this on Cardano pretty easy because, like I don't know what a minting smart contract is. Like we just mint NFTs here. And it's very simple. Like there's just the data for the NFT and a mint transaction and you're done. But like because all that stuff is locked inside of these weird ERC 7021 smart contracts on Ethereum, like it's so complicated. And like um in the end, I decided if I was open to it in the past, I'm just not interested because it's so complicated and it's so like so much of a hassle. I don't want to deal with it, right? And
Mhm.
so I thought it was important to like build bridges and this kind of thing, but like if it's too hard for me, then I'm not interested in doing it. And so I was just like, nope. Yeah, I'm at a space now where I get to do what I want to do, and what I want to do is work on Cardano. And so I almost turned down every offer of collabing now, because I say like I don't do collabs. Like I can't just like turn on my creativity to like figure out what an unsig looks like with a dog. Like that's not what I'm about. And so I don't do collabs. What I have done in the past, if you've seen like these dead pixels or these time trotter things, is um either in some cases I've given a project a few unsigs to work with the understanding that they'll give half of them back to me and they'll give me half of whatever they make, right? And then that's actually how I funded the Unsig DAO,
Hmm.
the treasury funds, right, which has 22,000 ADA in it to help the Unsig community. Is these dead it was launched with the dead pixel collab where I gave him the Unsigs, he gave me back half, and we auctioned them off, right? And then I said while we were auctioning them, whatever is raised here, 100% of that will go into a separate wallet. That wallet will be decided what to do with by the community. If you and right now I think we're having the first vote on like they want to build like an Unsig marketplace exclusively for Unsigs to buy and sell in a secure smart contract based way. And that's kind of exciting, right? Because the fees from that marketplace will basically go back. A portion of the fees from that marketplace will go back into the treasury until we'll have this kind of like self-sustaining mechanism for how to represent the interests of the unsigned community, as we call them, right? And kind of take things forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for answering that. I'd like to get into your creative process since you mentioned it.
Okay.
Um, so I see your work as sort of a culmination of all your experiences from the past. Um, and it's a pretty wide range of experiences and knowledge, but how do you see it yourself? And how does something like this come into existence for you? Like the idea.
So when I was in architecture school, I was very big into this thing called parametric architecture, which there's a famous she's deceased now, Zaha Hadid. Is I think she's Iraqi, but she was in the UK for a long time. Like very kind of curvy, kind of bizarre, not looking like normal buildings, kind of buildings, right? And everything I like to think of parametric architecture actually as an outgrowth of Baroque architecture, which is like what you see in Italy when you walk around, like all these crazy like floral patterns and carved into buildings and everything. And the reason I think that is um I wasn't aware of this until I was studying architecture, but all these kind of Italian buildings are like so caught up in geometry and mathematics. Like they do things like talk about the difference between an oval and an ellipse, right? Like what? Like aren't those? They're not the same thing. An oval is two. It's made up of arc sections of circles that meet at tangent points, right? But if you break it down, you can draw circles out of an oval. An ellipse is a fundamentally different. It's more like a squash shape that is more like parabolic, and there's a fun way of drawing them. If you take a This is a fun thing for your listeners. If you take a piece of string and you tie it in a knot, and you put two toothpicks into your desk, or two nails into a piece of wood, and then you take a pen and you pull it tight so that the loop of string is going around those two nails and the tip of your pen. If you drag that pen around those two things, that's the mathematical definition of an ellipse. You can imagine the triangle when it's like kind of up here. It's like this. When it gets over to here, it's farther away. It's a fun. I didn't know you could draw an ellipse like that, but so that what I'm trying to say is, in architecture, I learned a lot about how to mathematically define the shapes and forms of things, right? Because of this weird thing I was doing with, like, we were basically coding buildings, right, into existence, through, or the forms of buildings. And part of that had to do with, I think I mentioned, we were doing all this CNC and robotic fabrication. And so because we had to turn our designs into mathematical, kind of like, where should the drill bit be on the material. um kind of, all of us had to kind of understand what was going on, and we started to, rather than just giving arbitrary shapes to things, like, let's put a rectangle here, put a circle there, we started to think of more from like a code-based perspective, like in line with, there's a very famous architecture quote, you'll probably laugh at it, what does the brick want to be? Right? Like, what we think about that in architecture is, like, materials have like a quality to them, and part of your job is to, like, use materials responsibly and think about, like, what does a material, like, what's the language of that material, and how is it meant to be used, and not meant to be used from rules, but like, what is, like, from physics and from like deeper meaning, like, what is it, how do you use this stuff? And so all that kind of stuff, you know, started to lead me to have I think, a pretty fluent idea about traversing over code to creative practice, back and forth. Like, I basically can use code creatively to design buildings, right? And so when I was looking at the NFT space and I wanted to do something, it was pretty apparent to me, like, okay, I can make a color study. If I make a color study, how would I do that? And so, I use programming to, this is a big, I think this is actually the bigger moat around Unsigs. I use programming to implement an idea that I had. I see a lot of generative art right now where, yeah, it's generative, but I don't know what the idea is. Like, what are you, what that's another way of putting the earlier thing, like, what's the question that you have, or what is the thing that is driving it? Like, just making a computer make a bunch of images is not really an interesting thing to do, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of, it's like having an idea of what do you want to explore, and then the computer goes off and you give the computer an algorithm, a set of instructions for what to do, and it gives you back the results, right? But all a computer really is kind of a mechanical Turk. Like, it's this kind of like fake automaton that can automate and multiply your human creative thinking by going off and, like, I could have painted the entire Unsig collection, right? It would have taken me a long time. It would have taken me multiple lifetimes, but it could have been done that way, right? Or I could have hired, a lot of artists nowadays have studios with hundreds of people working them, like real traditional artists, right? Like this Ai Weiwei guy. They make like ceramic sunflower seeds and put like millions of them into a museum, right? And you walk over the floor of beautiful ceramic sunflower seeds. But um, the idea was that, I wanted to see what it would look like if we combine colors in all these different ways possible. And then my 16 core 96 gigs of RAM, AMD, system that I built, went off and did all the work for me,
Mm.
right? But if you don't have an idea or a question at the core of the project, I don't really care that it's generative. Like, yeah, you made a bunch of like things, but so what? Why should I care about that?
Right. It's just the tool that was used to create the
Yeah,
idea,
yeah, exactly.
like a
So
paintbrush or something. Like
yeah, I mean, to a little extent, it's kind of like, the a million monkeys on a million typewriters. Can they write a great American novel? Right? Like maybe, probably not. It doesn't seem like it because we have the internet now, and there's a bunch of idiots bashing on keyboards, and I don't see a novel coming out of that any time soon. Right? So,
I'd like
but
to
but
know the
that's
day that an AI would generate a great American novel.
Bert and GPT-3, some of these things they're pretty amazing. Like you put in a prompt, and you can get back like paragraphs that go on, and they kind of they don't just make sense, but they're kind of interesting. So but yeah, I think a novel is the first thing that I wanted to do in terms of creative process. It's quite funny actually. I wanted to be a writer, but I was too terrified of writing. Like I was such a wuss, like writing is so beautiful, it's so perfect, and like I don't want and so I just sit there looking at a blank piece of paper, right? And I couldn't do it. And the interesting thing is, when I got into architecture school, I was very worried the same thing would happen, right? That like I would be, too terrified to actually like put myself out there and to try and create. And what I found was that because writing was so important to me, like I couldn't do it because I didn't want to fuck it up. But because architecture was just like not that important to me at the time, like I could practice and play, and it was whatever. So if there's some kind of insight into that, it's like, uh, now as a designer, I understand like ideas aren't precious. Like I've had people in school, I'd had people at work steal ideas from me, and I don't care. I often say that, like my talent or my ability is to come up with many good ideas in a short amount of time and be able to put them out there and like prototype them, right? So like if you take one of my ideas, it's like taking a potato chip out of my bag. Like I'm a potato chip factory. I make potato chips. For you to run off with a potato chip, like I don't give a fuck, right? Like go do that. But and like people, it's funny to you see like these people you think are your friends, like spend a semester developing your idea, right? And then like when you get to the final review, it's like, but I've already moved on from that, and I have like 10 times better than that thing that you ran away with. And it's just kind of funny. So the main point there is that like if you treat something too perfect or too importantly, it kind of inhibits you from actually getting good at it. And
Mhm.
so I think the important thing is I think nowadays this is represented by like this like 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell thing, right? Like takes 10,000 hours to get to master something, right? And so if you don't spend at least the first hour or first minute trying to do that thing, of course you'll never get the mastery. And so for me, I couldn't spend even a minute writing because I was too terrified that I would like destroy writing for all people in all eternity, that it was not a good thing to do. But yeah, it's
So
amazing what
so
trying.
perfectionism is really was something a challenge for you to
Yeah,
overcome.
yeah, yeah. I was a big perfectionist in middle school and high school, and that eventually manifested. I dropped out of high school a few times. I never graduated high school. And I got a GED so that I could get into college eventually. But what do you call it? Yeah, like you do something perfect. The first maybe like I don't know 16 years of my life, I just did everything perfectly.
Hmm.
And then I had like a mental breakdown, and I was like, I can't do this anymore, I'm done. And my batteries are at zero.
Hmm.
And so like I dropped out, and I tried to go back, and I dropped out again. I kept saying it's like you're like charging your phone, and it's on low battery, and you try to turn it back on, and like you get like that was me. Like I'd used up everything. And then I basically didn't go to school for a year. And then what happened my junior year? I was just sitting at home reading books, and my friends came over. They're like, "Why don't you just come back to school, Alex?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess I got nothing better to do." So I went back. I dropped out of school. I didn't do anything my sophomore year of high school. I went back junior and senior year, but I was half a credit short of graduating. And the guidance counselors were like, why don't you do this? Just do this packet, which is this like weird, like, you know, you could take this thing home and get like half a credit or whatever remedial studies. I'm like, and I was just like a stupid rebel at the time. I was like, I'm not going to let a piece of paper tell me what I can do with my life. And so like I intentionally didn't graduate from high school, even though I had a 4.0 GPA, because all the classes that I had taken, I had always, you know, aced, but I didn't, it was such a funny thing. I haven't thought about this for a long time, but yeah, I either do it and I do it well, or I don't do it. And more recently, I don't do a lot of things. Part of that is time and growing older and having the autonomy to decide what I do, you know, and what I not do. And I actually think it's actually one of the most important things in life is like if you just say yes to everyone and everything, like you'll never have time to do what you want to do. And if you also to yourself don't have any discipline to, you know, just watch Netflix every night or whatever, instead of actually like bettering yourself and learning something. Like I didn't know programming. I don't have a computer science degree or training. Like I learned programming myself on my own in my own free time. That's not to like toot my own horn or whatever, but like I'm evidence of like you can someone can acquire a skill without formal training and get good enough at it that you can put it out there and you know potentially have a lot of success with it without having to, you know, I didn't even go to a boot camp, right? Like or any of these things that are popular now. Like you just open a book, take some tutorials online, read whatever, and you can go with it.
So for the first 16 years of your life, everything was great. You're doing everything perfect, and then kind of had a little bit of a
Utah.
struggle. Yeah.
Utah.
Okay, that's when you went from New York to Utah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I had a
what was the pivotal? What was like the catalyst that made you change? Like you went from, sort of a failure to then you changed yourself. Like what was it that caused that change?
I think I started to have more confidence in myself. I started to, I mean, so I have a Japanese father and an American mother. I grew up in New York and Connecticut. My dad moved to Hong Kong during the financial crisis of like 99 or whatever. The Hong Kong, you know, was falling apart kind of thing, Asian financial crisis. And my mom had the great idea to move to Utah with her biracial children. And I basically learned what like bumblefuck country racism is in Utah, right?
Yeah.
Like, um, and I love my mom, and I actually love living in Utah now because I think it made me a much stronger person. Like, I think I'd probably be like a pretty stereotypical, like, woke, whatever, you know, snowflake if I had just grown up in New York, right? But like I had some real shit happen to me in Utah. One time I was out Friday night cruising Maine as you do in high school. This is like where you just go out and like drive on the main street and try to talk to girls or whatever. And the doorbell rung at my house. My mom thought I was locked out. She came to the front door, and when she opened the door, a chicken came into the house and it was pumping blood all over the living room because its head was cut off. And what had happened was, I'm I can laugh about it now, but someone who didn't like me in high school came to our door. They knocked on the door, and they waited to hear that someone was coming. And then you know how you have like a screen door and a front door kind of thing. When they heard that someone was coming and was close, they cut the head off the chicken. They put it in between the screen door and the front door and like made it latch so that the screen door was shut, so that when the front door opened, the chicken could only come into the house. And you know, the whole like the chicken was running around with its head cut off, pumping blood out of its neck all over the, you know, the front room kind of thing. And then our mailbox blew up every day for a week, and the cops did nothing because they were also like racist fucks, and it was just a funny time. Like now it's just like wow, but like I really strongly believe like whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and like all this kind of like crazy stuff that happened, that kind of like contributed to my like let's say mental breakdown. Like I needed to be rebuilt in the same way that I think people talk about boot camp, right? Like they tear you down to rebuild you back again, except I didn't have like a drill instructor who was teaching me what to be. Like I basically got torn down and I had to decide what I wanted to be.
Hmm.
And I think that, I had lived a pretty sheltered life, pretty comfortable life in New York, just growing up, middle class, upper middle class, whatever kind of lifestyle existence. And like having all that happen to me and not having any kind of like role model for what to do. Like it took me a little while to figure out what I wanted to do. And that's probably what the dropout was about, and not graduating and being confused and everything. But I think, it made me question things a lot more about my life and about what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do with my life. Whereas my dad was an investment banker. He worked for like Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch, in the sense of like that was the road I was on in New York. Was I was just going to be an investment banker, right? Because I just wanted to make money and blah 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 blah. But basically, after Utah, like I became a commie bastard for a bit. Not anymore. But it was just a very fun time for me to kind of like figure out a bunch of stuff for myself.
So, did you have any reluctance towards creating the unsigned algorithms project, or was that one of those things that when you got the idea, you knew that it was it and you just went for it?
So reluctance in terms of like, did I want to do it or not, or
So you mentioned before that you were sort of reluctant when it came to
ah
writing. You
ah
were reluctant in some aspects of your
yeah,
creativity.
got it. I
What
understand the
what
question now.
about this?
This was like, once it clicked, I mean I was staying up till 3 a.m. working. Luckily I have a very supportive wife who was like filling in for me. And my job at the time was this, AI development stuff. And I was lucky that I could kind of do my job like 40 hours a week in like 5 hours or so, and like get enough done that my colleagues didn't know that I was spending most of my time on this. And so I'd say it was balls to wall all on this for like a month or two while I was doing it. And it was, even now, like it was so fun, and like my creative energies were just going like full tilt. I had such a blast doing it. It was just like, kind of a spontaneous, how do you say, like, creation. I love it. I loved it so much. And I'm trying to get back in the groove of it now. um
So when
and
did
it's starting to happen.
so you were just working on it constantly when you got the idea, but when did the idea come, and or how long was it? An instant thing, or did it come over a period of time? Were you
Oh,
conceptualizing
okay.
it over
So
time?
so the first kind of trigger was I was talking to this guy Patrick Tobler, who's NFT maker, right? And we were just talking about NFTs and like, what is this stuff that's going on? Oh Jesus, like I don't understand it, right? And I kind of looked at him like, why would you do that? I don't understand. And so I thought like, well, if people are doing this, I often talk about three levels of the project. The top is the study of color and this thing. The second is like blockchain based art. The bottom level is like, you know, I'm 36 now, and I like to think that I was a pretty smart person, and I had a good decent job earning, decent money, and I had an interesting career, but like I hadn't really made it. And there was always this kind of thing like my wife would always be like, why don't you just do something on your own, like actually, like if you are as good as you think you are, why haven't you done something? And I think that's in like a lot of our the back of our minds kind of thing, right? And I was like, okay, like let's shut this voice up. I mean, I love my wife. It wasn't to shut her up, right? Like, but to like let's prove yourself, right? Like if you
Yeah,
want to do something.
yeah.
And to be honest, I looked at everything everyone was doing, and I was like, I can do better than that. And and I don't mean like how do you say, like what I mean, like I think like I have more interesting ideas. I have like a different, I wouldn't say better, I have a very different take on all that. But there's a little bit of arrogance in it, a little bit of like confidence, like no, like this can be more than what it is. And it doesn't mean that other people couldn't do it also, and that others won't aren't better than me already. But like I thought I had a perspective and it was worth doing. And so I didn't know what that was, but I knew that like the sum input of all my experiences and career choices and things that I had studied, like I could do something if people were willing to pay for art on chain, like, or on, not even on chain, like art that was like a receipt of an art piece that was stored on a thing. My design process was like, I can do better than that. And so that's where the whole like on chain aspect of it came, like to basically just say, if people are willing to pay for receipts of art, why wouldn't they pay for art that was actually like on the chain? Right. And so that set like the medium. That's like saying, like, am I sculpting out of marble or granite, or, or am I painting? Right. Like that set like, okay, what are we doing? We're doing something on chain. And I knew you could make something on chain. Like I think even CryptoPunks, you could probably store as like a PNG of, like an 8x8 pixel or 16x16 pixel. I think that would fit on chain,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have to scroll in to get it larger, right? But that set the thing, and so like that set the medium, and then the question was like, okay, if this is a medium, how do you express yourself and what do you do? And so I had a few different ideas I was playing around with. The first ones were like these things that you see now, like these AI generated, because I was working in AI, like um, upload a photo and get back the Picasso version of the photo, right? Or the Van Gogh version. Like I literally have a presentation that I pitched to people. Like these are the different ideas I have for what we could do for like on-chain generated art. Um, and then I decided like I didn't really like that, and actually it's very difficult to fit an AI model on chain because AI models tend to be like hundreds of megabytes. And so that's where I realized, okay, this is going to have to be a more constrained thing. Like I have to, what I really like about this on-chain thing and the 16 kilobytes of Cardano, I always forget which one it is that it really requires you to be focused. That having that I'm not sure you're aware of this, but the size of a Cardano transaction has to be quite small, right? And so the reason Unsigs kind of work is that there's 63 lines of code which generates all these kind of images, right? And so those 63 lines of code are very efficient spatially. They don't take up a lot of space, but images take up a ton of space, right? So that's like I knew I was doing something code based because it just made sense that if you're working within a small definition of space or a small size, you almost have to generate it. So it's kind of like what's one of those Star Wars sequel movies? Like, who's the lady? She has this little powder and she adds water to it, and then it like turns into bread. You know what I'm talking about? It was like a 5-second scene in one of this. It's like a green loaf of bread, and people were like online talking about it when the movies came out. She's the Luke character in the new Star Wars movies. You know what I'm talking about?
I hate
She
to
had the
say
funny
this,
hair.
but I have very little Star Wars knowledge,
Good, perfect. Okay, I apologize. Different thing, but it's just like the other ways as these little like toy dehydrated dinosaur sponges, right? That like they fit into a pill, and then you put them in a bathtub, and then they turn into like the dinosaur or the shark or whatever. Like that's basically what an unsig is. It's a
Okay.
little bit of compressed, tiny little bit of code that when you run it, it creates an inflated 4096 by 4096 or as large as you want. I've made 16K versions of them, giant, image. And so I knew that's what I was working with. And the first bit of code took like maybe a week or so to generate this thing, which generates all these possibilities. It then took several weeks to figure out what was the combination of rules for editing that collection down.
Mm.
Because, I was basically looking at a 50 million different combinations of things.
Yeah.
And I was trying to come up with rules that could make it into a more manageable kind of size of collection. So that part was quite grueling. I started to like see double looking at my monitor, like, what's the difference between version 71 and 72?
Wow.
Right. Like
Yeah.
it's like, and I have a giant 34-inch 5120 by 2160 pixel monitor in front of me, right? Like, but I was just like, my eyes were starting to bleed together. And at some point I was like, yes, it's done. I've done it. Right. And like, but it was not as satisfying because like the first initial weeks were where the real fun was, like creating it and understanding it and doing. And then at the end of it, it took it took 2 to 3 times as long for me to like edit the collection down than it took for me to create the entire 50 million collection.
Hmm.
And then the funny thing is, after I used to think like, okay, now I'm done. It then took like, another huge chunk of time just like promoting it on social media,
Yeah.
right? Like talking about it and doing this Twitter thing for 2 months, which is still kind of ongoing for some reason. But yeah, yeah. So the process was interesting. I'm excited now that I'm getting back into the creative side of things and less social media stuff. So yeah, it's not fun for me.
It's good.
Social media,
We
that
need
is.
more. We need a lot more people like we need people like you in the ecosystem because
I'm
you're the
having fun.
inspiration. You're the leader that brings people
Um,
more people to the space. Um, so your process was you figure out what the medium is, then you figure out uh, what kind of can you sort of reiterate just a summary of the steps of the process?
yeah, I mean, okay. So first, it was like for me, a lot of design comes from a place of unsatisfaction,
Okay.
or like if something is good or it's fine or great, why would I do anything better? Like if I have a great thing, like I'm happy with it. I like my car. There's no problem. Most design, this is something I think that lay people don't understand. Good designers don't start with great ideas. They start with good observations of problems,
Yeah.
right? Like, and it's so people who are trying to like come up with a good idea, they get everything wrong. The genesis of a good idea is not in coming up with a good idea. It's in coming up with an observation around like things that people take for granted that don't have to be,
Hmm.
right? Like we don't have to be buying and selling receipts for pieces of art. That was my original genesis kind of idea, was that
I
it
see.
doesn't have to, it can be more than that.
Hmm.
So okay, and all I did was I took that idea and I ran with it. And I, as a designer and as an architect who had like creative like knowledge, abilities, training, like it was pretty simple, I would say, actually, to just take that. I won't say that unsigs were the only answer to that question,
Hmm.
but they were a good answer to that question
Hmm.
on multiple different levels, right?
Hmm.
And so, but the core of the unsigs, if I can say, is just like I happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right set of knowledge and experience. But again, like the core of the unsig idea is like we don't have to buy and sell receipts for pieces of art, right? And then everything else was just like I wouldn't say autopilot. There was a lot of thinking involved and whatever, but like it was just like, yeah, this. I don't think unsigs are very different than a lot of other design thinking that I've done in my career to address problems for other industries, other businesses, other R&D issues that I've had, right?
Wow.
How do you do anything? So good problems are much more important than good solutions. If you have a good problem, even if you have a bad solution to it, you can keep working on it till you have a good solution,
Hmm.
right? Most people that fail were working on the wrong problem.
Hmm.
They were working on a solution to a problem no one cares about, right? If you have a bad solution to a real problem and there are no other solutions to that problem, you'll succeed. One of my favorite thing, I really liked Malcolm X when I was in Utah. I got like radicalized, and there was this thing Elijah Muhammad said in the movie. This is the Denzel Washington movie. I don't
Yeah.
know if it
Yeah.
actually happened, right? But he's like, if you give a guy like a clean glass of water and a dirty glass of water, what are they going to drink?
Clean.
The clean glass of water, right? Like obviously, but I'll do it a step worse than that. If you give a guy a half dirty glass of water and a fully dirty glass of water, what are they going to drink? You don't even have to be clean water. You just have to be less dirty, especially if no one else has water. And
Hmm.
that's what a bad solution to a real problem is, right? Like the first iPhones, if we look at them now, they're pretty janky and whatever, right? But they were like the first solution to that kind of thing that brought it all together. So yeah, that's that creative process.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So a little bit of personal trivia here. What's on your
Mm.
bookshelf right now?
I have one of my this Philips Daylight light. I think you can see in my background if my head is not
Yeah,
there.
yeah, we can
Do you
see
mean
it.
my literal bookshelf, like books that I'm reading, or the
Yeah,
bookshelf behind me?
we can go either way. I was
Okay,
referring to the books, but
okay,
that's
yeah, I
interesting
have this
too.
shelf behind me. Um, to be honest, I these days I used to read fiction a lot, like in my undergrad days when I wanted to be a writer. And my favorite writers were this few Japanese guys, Mishima Yukio and Dazai Osamu, who are like, it's like kind of like Russian existentialists, like thinking about life and what is life, and depressed, funny people. Um, but these days, I have to say I'm very boring. I read a lot of technical stuff, and the thing that I've been trying to work my way through for years now. I'm on page 700 now. It used to be 600. Is Haskell from First Principles. It's like a
Wow.
1,200 page book, and I'm just like trying to absorb this and get it. And I've made more progress in the past month or two than I have in the past like 5 years because of I can work on this full time now. So I'm very grateful to everyone who's supported me through Unsigs, because this has been what I've been wanting to do for a long time. But yeah,
Good. I'm
I
happy
hated
for you.
nonfiction when I was in undergrad. Like I
Yeah.
didn't understand the point. I'm like, why would you read a nonfiction book? Like that's so stupid. What a waste of time to just learn about actual things that are happening in the real world. And I don't think I've read like a fiction book now in like, I don't know, like 10 or 15 years. It's kind of depressing.
Um, so what's in your NFT collection nowadays?
I have to say, not a lot. People send me a lot of free NFTs that
Like
they're
stuff
kind
that
of.
you went out of your way to pick up to collect.
I have to say, I don't know that I've bought any NFTs.
Interesting.
And it's not. I know I have actually. But it was different. I bought a 10 by 10 space on Cardano Spaces, which are you familiar with that project? Like the kind of cardanospace.com is the website, and it's like there's is it 100 by 100 grid? I think 100 by 100 grid of blocks, and you can put whatever you want in your block,
Hmm.
right? So I bought 10 by 10, about 100 of these for 9600 ADA, but I did it as like a way of promoting Unsigs, right? That like and I had made a bunch of ADA, so I don't. Yeah, I don't think I've really bought an NFT.
Hmm.
It's actually quite common in the NFT creators that I speak to. It's kind of weird. Like if you it's not because I don't believe in NFTs,
Hmm.
but it's also just like I like if you can make them, I don't know, like why would you buy them,
Right,
or
right.
what do you want to buy, or I mean, I try to support people in different ways, right? By like tweeting about stuff, or talking about whatever kind of thing. But yeah.
Just more curious about what your tastes are. What about in terms
Ah,
of traditional art? Like, is there some kind of traditional art that you collect or something like?
I mean, I'm too poor to buy traditional art, right? Like I usually like to walk through MoMAs in whatever city I'm in.
Mhm.
New York MoMA, San Francisco MoMA. There's a I don't know if it's technically a museum of modern art, but it houses mostly a modern art collection in Tokyo. Um, and yeah, so like stuff from like 1900s to 1950s or so is
Mhm.
usually what I'm pretty interested in. Um, I originally had the opportunity to go to this little Japanese island called Naoshima, which
Mm.
has this great set of like contemporary. I don't usually really like contemporary art. I think things fell off after. This is a confusing thing for people that don't know. Modernism is generally thought to be like, I don't know, 1920 to 1950 or so. Like that's like the modernist period. And like after that is like postmodernism, and then I don't know, like deconstructivism and all this other kind of ism stuff. But I'm modernism is kind of like the belief that like humans can progress, and that like tomorrow will be better than today. And it was kind of all thrown in like jeopardy by World War II and the Holocaust kind of thing. Like people basically believed in technology and humans' ability to like improve, because everything was getting better and all this technology was coming online. And then like seeing like what humans were able to do to one another made people think like, holy fuck, like what are, how is it possible? If we're so smart, if we're so good, how could we like be so brutal to one another in this like horrible, horrible way? And so that kind of caused a lot of like existential doubt in, I think, a lot of like philosophy and art circles. And people talk about like, can you paint or can you write after World War II kind of thing? Like, doesn't mean it. Like, how can you, in the face of such utter tragedy, like how can you do something as silly as like putting ink or paint on a canvas, right? Like it's so inconsequential when people are dying and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think, but I tend to believe, I really hate a lot of postmodern and a lot of like, I don't know, navel gazing contemporary artists kind of thing. Like they're just kind of like concerned with like relativism. What does this mean to me? What does this interpret as? Blah blah blah. And I do kind of think in more. I don't really believe in truth or that like a universal truth exists, but I do think that humans kind of need to believe in something on an individual level.
Right.
And so I like it goes back to this like Sisyphus thing, right? Rolling the stone up the hill, even though you know it's pointless, and even though you know it's going to roll down the hill, like that's kind of where I'm at. And so I like a lot of, I don't know, boring Mondrian like square lines on very simple compositions and Rothko and Solowit stuff that I've talked about a few times. But I don't know if I'll ever own a piece of art other than things that I've created, right? Because it's difficult to wrap your head around. You know, like why, how, and why would you pay tens of thousands of dollars for? One of my favorite things about an NFT is that I always felt conflicted. Like if you are successful as an artist and your things get worth a lot of money, and then like only rich people can like see them, buy them, and you know, or have to go to a museum to see them. One of my favorite things about NFTs, which is very unresolved, is that like anyone can see and view them, and it's not everyone can own them, whatever that means. And I'm not quite sure, you know, like what are the benefits of owning an art NFT, right? But I actually like that instability and that this idea that anyone can go on my page, just on unsigs.com, hit random, and they can look at the entire collection, right? They can just keep refreshing. And it's funny, there was an Indian guy who came into the Discord pretty early, like in the second or third day. He's like, I can program, I can like I want an unsig, but I can't afford one. And nowadays, I would probably give him one if I saw that same person again, right? And but I wouldn't actually. But it's I have been known to give an unsig to someone who I thought was like deserving and didn't have like the financial means to have it, whatever. But back then, I didn't feel like, even though I had like 30,000 of them left, I felt it was like disrespectful to people who had paid me for an unsig. Like if I set the precedent that like if you show up on the unsig doorstep and I just give them away, like then why would anyone choose to buy one from me? Do you know what I mean? Like and so what I told him was like, well, I have some jobs around here. You know, there's stuff that needs to be done. If you find, you know, if you think of an idea for how to improve the website or whatever, and you code it and you do it and you whatever, like I can pay you in an unsig, right? At the time it was like 58 for three of them. So that wasn't, you know, if he had done something, he ended up just disappearing. But like the thought experiment was that, you know, I would be happy to pay you in kind kind of thing. But I think owning art is a very weird thing, and I like that NFTs can be viewed by anyone, and that owners maybe have you profit sharing or revenue or whatever. There's other stuff, but I like the idea that there's this universal museum that anyone can go to anywhere and kind of see, and that it's not like locked away in some fuddy-duddy, you know, dark space that no one can see.
No, that's understandable, and that's fair enough. What about as far as your favorite work of art that you've seen, or the most beautiful work of art that you've seen, in your opinion?
Um, There is there's this German painter called I went blank on his name, Gerhard Richter, and he paints like these paintings of his early stuff was like photorealistic, just like they look like photos. They're oil paintings, but they look like photos of people close to him, whatever.
Hmm.
But there was this one thing. It's kind of, it's a very abstract, conceptual. It's not even conceptual. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is. I don't know anything about it. But it's just beautiful. It's got like these layers of like red and I think bright green, that were the early coatings of paint on the canvas, and then this very thick like dark gray, almost black on top of it, and it's like this very thick thing. And when I walked in front of it, I just like, it stopped me, and like I had to look at it, and like I kind of like zoned out for like an hour or two at in this museum in undergrad, and I was just like, wow. And that was something that was very kind of, I don't know, moving to me. I don't know why. I don't know what the name of the painting was. I just remember that experience, like even till this day, and it was very nice. And I bought a bunch of Gerhard Richter books, and I tried to find it. I've never found it, and I don't
Hmm.
remember the name of the painting. I've tried to find it a few times, but it was this. It's kind of describing that thing, that Rothko quote. Like I had an experience in front of that painting, and I don't know that I would have the same experience again today. I don't know that like it would move me, but like where I was at my life, in my life at that time, and what I was doing, like it was just, it really was kind of amazing to me, and I just loved it so much. And I go back to that same museum where I found it. I'm sure if I tried hard enough, I kind of like not knowing what it is though. I'm sure if I saw it again, it wouldn't be as amazing as it was
Yeah,
to me back
it's in
then.
your
So I kind of like
imagination
reminiscing.
now,
Yeah,
and like,
it's like the woman on the train or the man on the train that you like, you fell in love with from across the thing. But like if you got to know them, you'd learn that they were just like a boring dolt like everyone is. But the imagination of that person is so much more powerful than the actual person.
yeah, yeah. So to wrap up, is there any announcements that you'd like to make?
I mean, there's two things. Maybe the Unsig DAO is kind of in full swing. We've kind of finally figured out how to spend and stuff. So the kind of preconditions for the members only jacket are like, you own an Unsig, you can participate and vote in the how we're going to be spending this money that was raised, and the marketplace. I think we is the first thing that we're going to. I think we're voting on it now. I'm guessing it will pass, and that should be live by the end of November, is what we're thinking. And that will be like full smart contract based on Sig marketplace, which I think is pretty cool, because one thing that is my happiest thing about NFTs is that I run a stake pool as well. Like a lot of blocks were empty or low traffic before NFTs happened. And thanks to NFTs, Cardano has so much more transaction volume happening now. And that is actually being picked up on by people like Masadi and these, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, like, chain analytics people,
Yeah,
to say like, oh, wow, there's actual activity on Cardano, right? And
yeah,
so I think that's such a funny, interesting thing that like JPEGs, even though like I don't consider Unsigs to be JPEGs, right?
yeah,
Are essentially creating all this kind of like volume and transaction activity.
yeah,
And like, I mean, I was a little bit disappointed after smart contracts came out. Like, I think there were like tens or hundreds of smart contracts on Cardano, right? And so I think that one of the ways that the NFT community, cNFT community, can give back to Cardano is by deploying and using smart contracts for their kind of trading and volumes. Because right now, most of the marketplaces, except for one or two, Token.io and a few other, I think Genesis, they're basically e-commerce sites running on like Web 2.0 platforms. They're no different than eBay or Amazon or whatever. They're good for what they were doing, but now that we have smart contracts, it would be great if all this kind of velocity and volume of transactions was actually happening on the chain, right? Using smart contracts rather than being in like a database on an Amazon server someplace to kind of coordinate. So that's fun. And second is, I've touched on this a little bit, made a little bit of talk, but we mentioned it earlier. Unsigs are kind of this collection, and I'm working on another collection, which will not be called Unsigs, by the way. It has, I mean, nothing to do with Unsigs, other than it being in line with our conversation earlier, another kind of further answer to this question: what does it mean to make art on chain with art as a medium? And I've given myself another set of restrictions, right? No color, blah 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 blah. And so like they're more like a geometrical study than a color study, of form and shape, and also the viewer and the NFT and this kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that will be out by the end of this year. Originally, I was hoping for it to be out at smart contract time, but I'm plugging along on Haskell and Plutus and all this other stuff. I've gotten the art to kind of a place where I like it. But I'm trying to figure out another way to get it more kind of integrated to Cardano, which I think will be fun. So, though, sorry, that's a very lackluster announcement, but yeah.
Well, I think that's great, and we'll definitely be plugging you in the description as well. So if people want to know where to
Thank you.
reach at, it'll be
Twitter
there
is
for
probably the
them.
best place to keep in touch. There's a Discord link on the Twitter if you want to get more engaged. But yeah, super fun, man. Thank you for talking with me.
Alexander, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show today. I'm so grateful you came on and spent all this time explaining everything to us. It's
I
been
owe
a
you,
real
man.
pleasure.
I really apologize for how things started in the beginning, and I'm so glad you
Oh
took the
no.
time to do this. It's been my pleasure. It's been really fun to. A lot of your questions made me think about myself and what I'm doing and what I have done, and so I really enjoyed this time speaking with you, Mustafa, and I'm looking forward to this being released. Thank you so much.
And there will hopefully there will be a part two at some point in the future.
Yeah, whenever you're willing, hopefully I get something out there that's worth talking about again, and whenever you want to, just reach out to me. I'd be happy to do that. I really appreciate your time.
I hope we were able to cover some new ground for you today.
You did that. For those that don't know, I've done a few of these interviews, and Mustafa's very good about, like I said, I kind of done this a few times. Like let's do something new, and I'm so happy with the effort and time you put into coming up with these questions and having this conversation. So thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to you releasing this so that I can share it with the unsigned community. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. And for everybody else out there, that's all the time we have for today. If there's any other questions that you guys wanted to have asked, make sure you put them in the comments, and I'll find a way to get them over to Alexander. But it's been another episode of Cardano and Coffee, everybody. I'm Mustafa, the host of the show. Hope you enjoyed it. So long.